Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending. My name is Don Clemmer. I'm an enterprise sales engineer with Parallels, and we're going to be going through the Parallels Remote Application Server basic training today. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, I know it's a funny quirk in the WebEx. It makes you look like you're all by yourself out there, but you're not. For some reason, it hides all the attendees from each other. But you're not by yourself. We've got a fair number of people here today for attending. Thank you all for coming. The other one is about questions. I will leave some time at the end for some Q&A, but I actually like to make my sessions more interactive. And to be honest with you, I'd really prefer if we could just kind of chat, right, and ask questions as we go along and talk. But unfortunately, in the WebEx world, that doesn't work. If somebody asks a question using audio, we get staticky connections, echoes, somebody puts us on hold, we hear hold music, all sorts of things like that, and it just doesn't work. So unfortunately, everybody's going to be on administrative mute. However, we do have a chat function in WebEx. I encourage you to use that and just ask questions as we go along. There's also a Q&A section. I tend to watch the chat window a little more closely than the Q&A just because it's on top and it catches my eye. I have the chat window and the QA window both open up on a second monitor, so I will see them. And I will go back during the breaks and at the end to make sure that I've gone back and try to answer all your questions. So that's probably the best way. You don't have to save up your questions till the end, just ask them as we go through. Okay, so with that, let's get moving along here. The objectives, what we're going to be doing today, well, we're going to install Parallels Remote Application Server. We're going to use the best practices, the RAS components, and then throughout this, we're preparing for the certification exam. Now, some of you may be wondering, certification exam, what exam? The exam's for our partners. It's for the Parallels partners out there. It's not an industry exam. It's just more of a partner certification exam to make sure that when we're going out there talking to our joint customers, we kind of have a basic idea of what we're talking about. But we do encourage and invite and welcome everybody to the training. So if you're a customer, welcome. You're very much welcome here. So welcome, but you don't have to worry about the exam. So that's good news. From the course overview, we're going to be going through the technical training today. Like I said, it's going to go about 3 hours. We're definitely going to take a couple of breaks. I can't talk that long. And the format is pretty much going to be a little bit of lecture and then demo and the lecture and demo. Once we get through the beginning part, we'll probably spend most of the time in the product itself. As kind of a side piece, or I guess a prerequisite, if you will, there's also an architectural video out there that I believe you're instructed to watch before we attended this. If you haven't, it's okay. You shouldn't get too terribly lost without it, but it is there. I believe it's also up on YouTube. It's about 30 or 40 minutes or so, maybe 40, 45 minutes, I guess. I encourage you to watch that. We're going to touch on it just a little bit, the architecture. But mostly this is kind of just the hands-on installing. The architecture will take you through, designing for high availability, load balancing, things of that nature, and kind of get into the nitty-gritty in that area. This also, though, this online piece is not the only part of the training. There are also some training materials. There's a training manual, and there's also training labs associated with this. Now, we're not going to be doing labs today. The labs are offline. They're on your own. It's self-study. There'll be they're in the partner, where those materials are. Also, if you don't have access to the partner portal because you're not a partner, don't worry. There's a follow-up email that's going to come out, and it'll have a link to a Dropbox that I maintain. And I've put the training manual and the lab manual, as well as other things in there as well. Inside that Dropbox, it'll have a copy of today's recording, and also a copy of the slides that we're using. So it's there. And then, like I said, the other piece, of course, is the certification exam. It's online, it's open book, so it really shouldn't be too challenging for you to take. But if you just go to the partner portal, and again, that's parallels_ras.partnerprm.com, you go there, you can click on the Get Certified. There's some training material here. And at the bottom there, once you move to that next page, you can see you can take the training. There's the regular training, which is this. There's a sales training, and then we have a new advanced training that's out there as well. And the advanced training, we run it about once a quarter. Again, everybody's welcome to attend this, but it gets into some of the topics that are a little more detailed and a little bit longer to configure, a little bit more complex. Things such as multi-tenancy using SAML with Azure AD, running VDI on Azure, some advanced troubleshooting techniques, how to set up a load balancer using AWS or Azure, a bunch of other topics as well. So that runs quarterly. And again, everybody's welcome to attend that if you'd like. And also there's some other materials out there beyond just the training materials. Don't forget about that. Most of the stuff is in our documentation. So there's an online knowledge base article or knowledge base that you can access the knowledge base or KB articles. If you just go to http://parallels.com/product/RAS/support, that's where it is. I never remember all that. I just go to parallels.com, I click on products, I then click on remote application server, and then I go to parallels.com, I click on support, and then I choose remote application server, and it takes you right there, and that's the knowledge base. You can also shortcut to the knowledge base just by going to kb.parallels.com and then choosing remote application server. But if you go to that support page, that's also how you access our documentation. So if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, there's a link there, very big and obvious to see, only not so much, that says technical documentation and resources. And inside of that, you'll see the admin guide, the solutions guide, or best practices, which I'm going to be referencing once we're doing the install, printing best practices, client guides, what is the Parallels client for Windows and the Parallels client for Mac, what are some of the features and how do I use that? Those are there as well. So all of that material is available to you, as well as just the training material, and that goes into the admin guide is pretty all-inclusive, for instance. Okay, and then kind of moving on here, one other thing I like to put up just as a reminder, and we're not going to cover every one of these topics today. I will cover some of them. Some of them are going to go over to the advanced training, but everything I talk about today is included, right? All of these features and functions. There's no Advanced Enterprise Platinum Plus Data Center Edition. There's just one price for Parallels. We remote application server. We license everything purely by concurrent user. So we don't limit it by the number of servers, the number of cores, the components, this feature, that feature. You have everything available to you, so you can use what you need to use without having to worry about getting a different license or anything of that nature. It's just that one license model. And the license model also, by the way, includes the support. So full 24/7, 365 support is included. We don't charge an uplift for that. And it includes upgrades. So once you're ready to go, you can always upgrade to the latest and greatest. Okay, so that covers kind of most of the general housekeeping. So let's move on a little bit. And let's get into installing and configuring the product, So the first thing I'm going to do is take us through a little bit of architecture and just some background, and then we'll kind of move over and actually install RAS, and we'll add a PowerPoint, and we'll probably spend most of the rest of the time actually in the product itself. So just very high level, like I said, there's a lot more detail about this in that architecture video that I was mentioning, but just at a very high level, there's three core components to Parallels Remote Application Server. There's the publishing agent. Those two boxes on top in red that are kind of tied to each other. It's the connection broker, the controller, if you will. It runs on Windows. When you run the installer, go next, next, next. It puts down a publishing agent. It also will put down the gateway. So the secure client gateway, those two purplish boxes kind of below the publishing agent stacked on top of each other with a lock. That's what end users actually will connect to get into Parallels. And the other piece that's installed by default is the remote desktop server, or remote desktop session host, or the terminal server, whichever name you prefer. We lay down a very small agent that allows us to manage those. You also can do VDI. VDI just isn't in the default install, but it's certainly included in that. So if you just take next, 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 when you install RAS, you'll end up with one of each of these running on a single server. I've added two and split them apart just so we can kind of understand the traffic flow. The other piece all by itself there on the left is the High Availability Load Balancer, or HALB, H-A-L-B, by its acronym it's known. It's a virtual appliance that comes with the product. It's obviously a separate download since it's a virtual appliance, but it's included in the pricing. And it provides what I call front-end load balancing. So the way this would all fit together is your users would make a parallels connection to the load balancer, and they would connect over port 80 or port 443. The load balancer does NLB, network load balancing, so it's just round robin. So it does round robin load balancing of the gateways. You can have more than one load balancer if you'd like, but for this, we'll just keep it at one just so we can see the traffic flow without cluttering the slide too much. So it does round robin. So the first user coming in, we're going to go to gateway number 1. It's going to maintain that connection port, 80 or 443, depending on if you're using SSL or not. The gateway is then going to ask the publishing agent, what am I supposed to do with this person? The publishing agent will have Active Directory do the authentication. Once that's done, it will query Active Directory for the group membership, and then based on that, it's going to route them to the correct remote desktop server and provide them with their stuff, right? Their desktop, their applications will have available to them, they'll get that. And then the gateway will actually make an RDP connection from itself server or the remote desktop server, and that's how we get there. So we're using the RDP protocol. So the users coming in, though, will not be doing that. They'll just be coming in over port 80 or 443. You would never expose 3389 to the public internet, and you don't even have to expose it to the end users on the internet, on the intranet, on your network behind the firewall, because you're just making connections to the gateway over 80 or 443, and that RDP connection is done only between the gateway and the remote desktop server. Okay, next user that comes in, they're going to go also parallels connection. They're going to hit the load balancer. The load balancer, hey, went to number 1, so this time we're going to number 2, right? Round robin. And then it's going to go through the same process: publishing agent, Active Directory, group membership, remote server, and here's your stuff, and so on and so forth. So just kind of back and forth, like I said. That's what I call front-end load balancing. And the product, though, like I said, is fully load balanced end-to-end. So the load balancer is load balancing the front end of the gateways. But we notice on the back side, the right side, we've got seemingly random lines going to the 2 remote desktop servers. They're not really random. What's happening there is we're doing resource-based load balancing, and that's what I call the back-end load balancing. So now that we have some users already on the system, we'll go ahead and have another user make a connection. He'll launch a parallels connection, 8443, going to number 2, because last went to number 1. And then from here, the publishing agent is going to look at the resources that are running on those 2 remote desktop servers. They're going to balance the user sessions, the number of sessions with the memory and the CPU utilization, and then we'll make an intelligent decision about where to send them. So in this little scenario with my cartoons here, we do have more people on number 2 than number 1, but the 2 users on number 2 aren't doing as much, at least as far as the server is concerned, right? We're getting a cup of coffee, we're maybe having a conference call, versus the fewer users on number 1, they have their heads down and they're kind of banging away, driving workload onto the server. So in this scenario, it's very possible, for space load balancing, we would send the next user to number 2. Keep in mind, it's not just the memory and CPU, we're also looking at the number of users as well. So we're balancing all 3 of those in the algorithm. Okay. So that gives us a fully load balanced product end to end. You can design this without any single points of failure. We get into this, as I mentioned, a lot deeper if you take a look at that architecture video. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that remote application server is a solution, right? It's a completely full solution. It includes everything. So if you've got VDI users, they would use the same exact front-end infrastructure, gateway, publishing agent, Active Directory, but they would get handed off to a virtual desktop running on a hypervisor. And we're hypervisor agnostic. It doesn't really matter which hypervisor that you have for on-prem. You can use vSphere, Hyper-V, actually even use a Citrix Zen server. We've got hyperconvergence partners, Scale and Nutanix, a bunch of other, pretty much any KVM-based system we can connect to. You can even mix and match. So if you have a mixed environment of like, you're on vSphere and maybe you're switching to Scale, you could have both of them connected simultaneously. End users don't care where they end up. They just want their virtual machine. That other orange box that kind of popped up over there on the right is something that people tend to forget about, but it's a physical PC. So you can actually use this to control access to a physical PC. So if users suddenly have to work from home for whatever reason, maybe a quick down and dirty way is just give them access to a physical PC. That way they can do that instead of having to set up a larger server infrastructure, at least for the short term. Also, administrators really like that function because they've got an administrator system and they're like, I really don't want to carry it back and forth every day, but I've got a home computer, so I could just use that to log in, get to remote control my work computer, and then just do a few things I need to do from there. And on the client side, one other thing before I forget about that, since I was talking about working from home, if you do come in over the cloud, and you're going to have a firewall, of course, sitting in front of all this. And the only port you have to open on the external firewall is 443. So in that case, you wouldn't be coming in over port 80. You would want to come in over 443 so that you could use SSL. All right, and then it's fully encrypted end to end all the way through. So you don't have to use a VPN with this, right? You could just have a public IP address. It got port 443 opened up on the firewall. It maps to an internal address, in this case, the load balancer. And then from there, you're good to go. And then on the client side, that's where I was going a minute ago, you can run pretty much any type of client that you want. You've got a client software available for Windows, is still the most popular, but Macs, Chromebooks, great experience on tablets and Android, iOS devices and smartphones. Linux will work. We have a client for Linux, variety of thin clients, and we also have an HTML5 interface that can work with the client. I'll show you that, or it can go just completely clientless. Just open up the web page, log in, and go, and you can access everything just using that. And some other client platforms out there as well. So again, all of this is included, right? So there's no uplift for any feature or function here that you'd like. If you look at just the simplicity of it, like I said, if you just do an install and go next, 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 you end up with a single server like this. So you've got everything running on a single server. It's one of the really cool things about RAS that it has the ability to scale down. So I can install all the components on a single server. The default would be using a remote desktop server or session host. I could do just VDI with this, and I also could do both. So I could do either one. This is a really great way to get started, right? You can very quickly perform functional testing on this, or maybe install it and study for a lab. For a test, that kind of thing in a lab. So very easy to do, just next, 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 a little bit extra for VDI, but not a whole lot. It's not too bad. And then you can perform functional testing. You know, how does this work? What's the end user experience look like? What do these settings do and all of that? So very, very quick to kind of get up and running without having to set up a massive amount of infrastructure just to do some basic testing. It's also nice that you can have a quick down and dirty test and dev environment. We also do have a fair number of people running this in production, believe it or not, right? They're in very small environments, and for them, cost is more important than resiliency. And so it's great for that as well if you've got some really small customers that are kind of worried about keeping the cost down. And then from here, it's really easy to scale out. So you can scale out very quickly on this. This is kind of I've created 2 all-in-one servers, and I've introduced the load balancer into the equation. I've got redundancy or scalability here. I don't really have both because I don't have N+1, but I have one or the other. And remember that because Parallels charges by concurrent user, not by the component or the server, this costs the same as the first one. So there's no difference in price. It's just purely by concurrent user. This is actually what we're going to build out today when I do the lab. I'm going to create one server, or when I do the demo, rather. We're going to add a second all-in-one server, and then we'll introduce the load balancer, and we'll get to this point. Once you've done this, you'll kind of have the methodology behind, or the technique, if you will, which is, technique's a pretty strong word. It's pretty simple to do, as you'll see. But once you've done this, you'll kind of understand how you can scale out even farther. And you can scale up to 500 users, several thousand users. I think our testing limit in a single farm is about 7,500 users. But we're going to go this far today in terms of the demo. Okay, one other thing I want to introduce you to, mostly because it's on the exam, and you might want to pay attention, is a concept called RAS sites. So if you just go next, 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 you end up with a single farm and a single site. You may not even notice that the site is there, other than there's a button or line item in the interface that says site, but that's what we've done. We've created a single farm and a single site. So farm is the highest level component, and it contains a single site or multiple sites. So you can add second site, third site, however many sites that you want running under that single farm. Now, what makes up a site? Well, a site effectively is almost like just a whole nother RAS instance, almost. right? It's got a publishing agent, it's got gateways, it's got a load balancers in it. At a very minimum, it has to have, for a site to be functional, bare minimum, it's got to have a publishing agent, a gateway, and then something to publish from. Remote desktop server, VDI, desktop, or remote PC. That might be an exam question. What does a site consist of at a minimum, right? And it'll be those three components: the publishing agent, the gateway, and then, like I said, something to publish from. Okay, I think that's enough of PowerPoint for a while. Why don't we go ahead and start getting into the product itself? But first, I promised I'd take you through some of the prerequisites. So let's kind of do that on this system first. So I'm going to go into Server Manager. And the first thing I'm going to do, we actually don't have to do. I'm going to turn this into a remote desktop server. Parallels RAS can do this for you. Show you what the process is and exactly what we need to do. So if I go to Manage and Add Roles and Features, next, drag this over in the middle where we can see it. The first thing is I just wanted to show you what we're actually going to install. Don't choose the full remote desktop services installation. That includes all that VDI infrastructure, the web controller, or the controller, the console, the broker, all that other stuff. We don't need any of that. If you do this manually, again, Parallels can do this for you, choose the top one, role-based or feature-based installation. Go to Next. Yeah, this is the server I'm on. Next. Go down here to Remote Desktop Services. I'll select that. Next. Go through features. I'm not going to add any at the moment for those. And then here's the Remote Desktop Services. This is the only one we require. Add the features there. The Remote Desktop Session Host role. That is it. None of this other stuff, the connection broker, the Microsoft Gateway, the virtualization host web, none of that stuff is required. The one that is required, of course, somewhere is the remote desktop licensing. Right? We are using a Microsoft product. We have to purchase the Microsoft licenses. This would be the RDS CALs, or client access licensing. So you do have to license your installation via Microsoft as well. We call that the Microsoft tax. There's no way around that. But it doesn't have to go on this server. It can. There's no reason why it couldn't. I just prefer to not put it on this server because it's a server that users ultimately are going to be interacting with. It's slightly more vulnerable than perhaps another server. And if you put your licenses here and something happens to this server, yeah, it can be a little challenging to recover those licenses, shall we say. So I typically put it here, but you do need to run it somewhere. And if you're in a very small environment and you need to double up, you certainly can. There's no technical reason not to. But back to my original point, this is the only one we need is remote desktop session host. And Parallels RAS, and I'll show you this when I do the installation, actually can do this for you. So you don't need to do this step. I just wanted to go in here so that you could see actually what's going to happen. And of course, when you install that, it does require a reboot of the server. So I'll go ahead and kick this off and we'll let this run in the background. The next piece is let's get tuning to the best practices, and this is what I wanted to show you. A lot of these settings are down in group policy. So I'm just going to use local group policy here and go to right-click Run, GP, edit.msc. Looks like my caps lock is on. There we go. And we'll go ahead and click OK. That'll get us into local group policy. Best practice would be to do this at the domain level because you'd be using it on all your remote desktop servers, your terminal servers, and your VDI instances as well. You can do all this. So let me expand this window out because Microsoft buries these settings down in here. So what am I doing? Well, remember we used the RDP protocol, and starting with Windows 2008 R2 and I think Windows 7 SP1, Microsoft added some extensions to the RDP protocol to really improve their performance dramatically. And then they've been improving them ever since and adding more and more extensions and features. Those extensions are called Remote FX. Parallels takes advantage of those, and we've done some work, and we actually have some tuning parameters that we prefer that you use. All of this, by the way, is in our best practices document. So you don't have to run a screen share or feverishly write all this down. It's all in there. You don't have to do that. But most of the settings are under computer configuration. I'm going to expand administrative templates. I'm then going to expand Windows components. I'm going to go down here to the remote desktop services and expand that. I'm also going to expand the remote desktop session host. And then finally, I'm going to click on the remote session environment. This takes us to the settings that we want. So starting right here in the middle, use advanced remote effects graphics for remote app. I'm just going to double click and open that. And then I'm going to go ahead and say, let's enable this. And then I'll just click next setting. Notice over here, it enabled it when I did next setting. This is a little Windows tip. Apply means apply the setting, but don't close the window. OK means apply the setting and close the window. And then in this particular tool that Microsoft has, next setting means apply the setting and move on. So you can just click next setting. Prioritize the H.264 ABC 444 graphics mode for remote desktop connections. These two settings here, I'll go to next setting and enable the next one also. You can look at this. They're for vGPU virtual machines. So if you're running vGPUs, Microsoft has some extensions that could take advantage of this. You usually need to be running Hyper-V under the covers. That's the only hypervisor, I believe, that supports the pass-through from Microsoft on this. These settings weren't available prior to 2016, but they're here now. If you don't have vGPU in there, it's okay. I usually just turn them on just because, I get clicking next, and going. And the reason I don't worry about it is you can see this, it says attempt only for remote FX vGPU virtual machine. So if you don't have a vGPU in there, it's not going to do anything. So won't hurt, won't harm either. But I'll just leave that on. We'll go to next setting. Configure compression for remote FX data. Yes, I absolutely want to turn this on, and I want to change this setting to be optimized to use less network bandwidth. This will keep us from sucking up too much bandwidth over the network, which can be important, assuming everybody's not running at full LAN speed in the office, right? Or even if they are, perhaps you want to keep that down. This is a huge feature to turn on. So enable, optimize to use less network bandwidth. We'll go to next setting. Configure the image quality for remote FX adaptive graphics. Enabled, yes. This is a weird one, right? Because the default setting is lossless. Lossless is really high. Really high. So it's really going to suck up a lot of network bandwidth. It can make things really slow. The other thing is a lot of non-Windows clients or clients that can't support this won't even be able to connect. Our recommendation is medium. So use medium. That seems to be the best balance between providing the end users with a very nice graphical experience to keep them happy, but also not putting too much stress on the network and the infrastructure that you're running at. If you feel that you need a little bit better image quality, you could experiment with bumping it up to high. Lossless, I'd be very careful about, but typically medium is really a good setting to just kind of leave it at. That's our general all-purpose setting. If you're not really sure, go with medium. You can always come back and change it later. Then we'll move on to next setting. Enable our remote FX encoding for remote FX clients designed for server 2008 R2 SP1. Yes, I'm going to do that. So think about how this works, right? Microsoft is going to negotiate a connection with the end client, and then it's going to connect at the highest common denominator between the server, the remote desktop server, and the client. What's the highest level of remote FX that both of them can support? So if you connect from a system that is Windows XP, guess what? It doesn't support remote FX. You'll connect, but you get none of these benefits or none of these settings. If I connect at Windows 7 SP1, and that's essentially what this setting is going to do, I will connect at the Windows 7 SP1 level of remote FX. If I connect at Windows 10, I'll connect at the latest and greatest version of remote FX, provided that my service pack are up to date, right? That is fully patched. Oh, and the other half of the equation is the server, right? I'm running on a modern server. I think this is 2019, it might be 2016, but regardless, I'm going to be connecting at a very late version of Remote FX. If I was running on 2008 R2, it doesn't matter what my clients are, they're going to connect at the 2008 R2 level of Remote FX, provided you're not connecting from Windows XP. As for non-Windows clients, this is actually really, really cool. Parallels has licensed the Remote FX technology from Microsoft, and we built it into our non-Windows clients. So if you're running off Macs or Linux or anything like that, you can take advantage of Remote FX. We've even built the features into iPads and Android tablets, other iOS and Android devices and Chromebooks, and lesser clients, if you will. So they even those can take advantage of remote effects. Now they're probably going to be taking advantage of kind of a download version of remote effects because they don't have not a Windows 10. You're not going apples to apples here. You're going apples to oranges or something. So it'll probably be slightly lower version of remote effects, but it'll still be remote effects, and you can take advantage of that. So it's always going to connect to the denominator that both the client and the server support. So I'm going to go ahead and enable this because of that, and then I'll go on to next setting. Configure remote effects, adaptive graphics. I'm going to enable this, and for the RDP experience, I'm going to let the system choose the experience for the network condition. That'll let it kind of move up and down so that the users can continue working without having to get lags and so forth. Okay, let's go on to next setting. Program on a connection. I don't really care. This is, if you want to do it, fine, but it's outside of the tuning parameters. So at this point, I'll click OK. So I clicked OK once, I clicked Apply Never, and I've enabled all these settings. So there we go. The next one is, let's go into this folder, Remote Effects for Server 2008 R2. The first one is on, Configure Remote Effects. Right? Let me drag this over into the middle so we can see it again. Because we turned that on when I turned on that setting for Windows 2008 R2 that I talked about for so long. So that was already on, but I want to enable the other two as well. So next setting, optimize the visual experience when using remote effects, enabled. And again, medium is really an all-purpose setting that provides that nice trade-off. You could experiment with higher quality. Again, this is for older versions of Windows. So if you're running a 2008 R2 server, you actually probably won't see this folder. You'll see this setting up in the main tree. Or if you're running clients that are running like Windows 7 Service Pack 1, have to have Service Pack 1 to get remote effects in Windows 7. Okay, so we'll enable that. And then next setting, optimize the visual experience for remote desktop service sessions. I do want to enable this. Rich multimedia is exactly what you want because the other option is text. So we will leave it at rich multimedia, and I'll go ahead and click OK. All right, so that's done. And then now let's move up to device and resource redirection. So it's right under the same tree. And again, all of this is documented in our best practices guide. The best practices guide, by the way, has different listings of settings for different operating systems. So if you still are on Windows 2008 R2, we'll actually show you the settings for that specifically. If you're on 2012 R2, 2016, 2019, you'll see those settings specifically for that. But here under device and resource redirection, the first three settings are audio and video playback. So I'm going to go ahead and here, drag this down where we can see it. And I'm going to allow audio and video playback. Next setting, allow recording bidirectional audio. So if you're using a soft phone, video chat, we have a lot of people doing that. That is supported in a great use case for this. And I'll go to next setting and limit the audio playback quality. I do want to enable that, but let's make it dynamic. That way we can kind of make sure that the connection stays going. We all hear that. Some of you guys may be hearing this over the WebEx today if my voice breaks up. It's the audio quality and limited bandwidth from time to time. Okay, so those are the top three up there. I'm going to go and click OK. And then the bottom one is a very nice feature. Drag this down in the middle again. So allow time zone redirection. Clients are connecting from a different time zone than the server. This allows time seeing what it is in the server. That's particularly useful if they're in a full remote desktop and they look at the little clock. So go ahead and click OK. That's there, and then that's it for those settings. The next one, we're going to go up a little bit to the remote desktop connection client, and I'm going to go to a folder that is remote effects USB redirection, and I'll double click and drag this over again. The allow RDP redirection of other supported remote effects USB device. This computer, click enable, change this from administrators only to administrators and users. So what is this? This redirects local USB for the clients. So if they plug in a local USB device, USB or camera or whatever, it'll redirect it and make it available on the server side. If you don't want this, you don't have to turn it on. But keep in mind, what we're really doing here is creating the control to do this. RAS policies can set, rather from the console, can change you do or do not do this. Okay, you can decide if you turn it on, that'll you can pick and choose who can and can't. Just you as the administrator that can. So just keep in mind that's what that setting is. Okay, so that's all for the performance tuning, but while we're here, I wanted to show you one other thing. Remember when we did the install, remove add roles and features, and just add the remote desktop session role? Well, one thing Microsoft did, I believe it was 2012 R2 and later, is if you do not install their connection broker, you don't have this GUI interface down here to manage the remote desktop server. And it's not a problem because we do that. We do everything and way more for you. But the one thing that's missing is the RDS CAL license. You're like, okay, I didn't install. How do I CALs, right? I've got my server set up. How do I for this particular RDS this server? How do I tell it where the licenses are? How does it know where to go check? The answer is right here in group policy. I go to licensing. This isn't in the best practices document, but if you follow the best practices document, it'll take you right to this section, remote desktop session host, and you'll see here. The best practices document, it'll take you here. And then for double click, let me drag it over again. And you specified remote desktop license server. So here's where you could put where the server is. And then the next setting is, well, the bottom setting here is this would be the mode. You know, do you want it per device or per user? Most people are per user. It just depends on the type that you purchase. You could set those there. I'm going to cancel this. I'm not going to set this. Microsoft very generously gives us 120 days of grace period for testing. This is absolutely a test server. It's not going to last anywhere close to that long. So I'm not going to bother with a license server on this one. So I will go ahead and close this. Okay. There's a couple other settings that we do talk about for performance. One of them is UAC, user account control. I'll let you guys figure if you want to use that or not. I'm going to go ahead and close this. The other one I wanted to show you actually is not in here under remote desktop, which I've turned on. I'm actually not going to set remote desktop. What I wanted to do was go to the advanced tab and go into the performance settings. We typically would say adjust for best performance. And again, this is in the best practices document. That would give us a little better end user experience. And then the other one under advanced, and this is the one that starts kind of bar fights and a lot of debate, is the virtual memory. So I'll go to change. I'm not going to do this here, but typically what we do recommend is setting the paging file static. I guess I will do it to be, I think I have 4 gigs of memory in this. So to be twice the physical memory in the system. And you read a lot of online documents about how this is a great idea, or this is a stupid idea, or it's a pointless idea, or whatever. Why do we do this? To be honest with you, well, here's why. If you set this, you end up with a contiguous paging file, right? Otherwise, if you just let Windows kind of grow and shrink it, you can end up with a paging file that's fragmented all over the hard disk, and so then you have to run defrag all the time, and it gives you a nice contiguous hard disk. If you're thinking about spinning media and spinning hard disks, that's very important. As we move more and more into the age of these, doesn't really matter, right? It's not physical media that's spinning, it's not mechanical, so that doesn't really get you so much. It still can be useful because it saves that little bit of time that Microsoft would have to use to kind of expand the paging file size if you needed. And I have seen this work. We had a customer that was copying very large amounts of data back and forth between the workstation and the client, just copy, paste, paste. And they had this set, but it was still causing tremendous performance and lag issues for them. We actually bumped that up to 3 times the physical data or physical memory, and then they started getting much better performance. Again, that was on Spain. Yeah, it was a few years ago. So I'll leave this up to your discretion. We do mention and talk about it in the best practices document. Why do we pick 2 times the physical memory? Kind of like setting it to medium, right? It's a general all-around good setting. So I'll go ahead and click OK, OK, OK. That's going to make me reboot the remote desktop service isn't finished, and that required a reboot. So I think that's a good time. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this system. And while this one's kicking off, I actually have another system that's set up and we can do the installation without having to wait for it. But I have one more little bit of things I want to talk before we kick off the install. So let me go into Chrome. The thing I wanted to do while I was here was just, remember I talked about our documentation that was hidden. I just wanted to show you. You go to parallels.com, I go to support, and then I pick my product, which is Parallels Remote Application Server. Here's the online knowledge base. Here's where you can sign in using your account and get access to support. And then if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, right here in this very obvious text, not so much, is the technical documentation and resources. And then within here, you can get to the administrator guide. This is the best practices guide right here that has everything that I went through. To be honest with you, the best practices guide has gotten kind of large. I think it's a little bit out of control. I'd like to see a little more focused. It's all really good information, but I'd like us to break out to kind of a tuning guide. I think it's chapter 3. It's the section on remote effects. Just do a control F, a find for remote effects, and then you'll find that section. That's the one to really pay importance to up front, or pay attention to up front, and then you can kind of follow along behind. But there's a whole ton of stuff in here, how to set services. I'm going to do that for you, but we're going to go kind of quick, so I'm going to have you, this is a great place to kind of go to it. Solutions guide, which will get you into a lot more complex infrastructure setup is there. If you want to get into some of the advanced topics, like we would have with our advanced training, here's some SAML information, scaling with Azure, and then some reference architectures. And then down here at the bottom, these are all the guides for the client side. What exactly can I set and do on the Windows client versus the Mac client versus, Chrome or anything like that. So all of this is available right here in our documentation. I know we hide it, but I've showed you how to get there now. Okay, let's get closer to the installation. Go to our download links, so parallels.com/product/raz/download/links. This is where you can download all our software. You can go back in time if you want to supported versions. So you can go backwards as far as 15.5 and download older ones. We're going to stay on the latest and greatest. Also right here is very nifty thing, the changelog. This is a large running document that we constantly update, and it shows the history of what we're doing. So you can go back in time if you really want a science project, all the way back to, I don't know what's down here. Version 3.3, I guess that was the earliest changelog, 2006. Product's been around for a while, developing it pretty heavily and aggressively. But you can see what was added, or it's really useful for the new ones. You can log in and kind of see what was added recently. Let's see. I know there was one in here that was new, that was interesting. Right here, this was a really cool feature that was just added. I'll show you where this is. You can now do groups for multi-factor authentication exclusions, meaning that if you turn on 2FA, two-factor authentication, you can have certain groups get challenged and certain not. It used to be more just by location. If you're working from home, you'll get challenged. If you're in the office, you won't. You could set that exclusion, but now you can do it for groups. So some people get challenged and some don't. Okay, back to this, which is what I wanted to show you, the files. The core server component, that has 95% of everything that you need is right in here. These other things, as we scroll down, here's the client installation files, and you've got Windows, you got Mac, Macintosh, Linux, Android, Chrome, iOS. You'd actually get to the store, the Apple Store, but you can do all that. For the Windows, though, I wanted to show you that there's actually two files. There's a basic, and then just the regular, or I would call it full. The basic installs in user mode. You don't require administrator privileges to install it. The full client does require administrator privileges. So if your end users are installing the client and they don't have admin privileges on their systems, they use the basic. What does the basic not give you? Or I guess the better way is, what does the full client give you that the really two big features. The first one is single sign-on. If you're running a Windows system, it has the ability to just sign you in automatically into RAS. So as long as your workstation is joined to the Active Directory domain, you sign in, we use those credentials to sign you into Parallels, and you're good. You don't have to sign in again. The other one would be things such as like creating shortcuts on the desktop or adding shortcuts to the start menu you can do on the client system. So those would be the two big things that you wouldn't get if you do the basic. These other server components down here, the reporting service and the performance monitor are separate downloads. I'll show you both of those in a little bit. The HALB, this is where you get the load balancer. It's a virtual appliance. It comes in OVA, VHD, and VMDK formats so that you can choose the version that you need for your hypervisor. And then I would draw a line at this point right here. The VDI agent appliances you do not need to worry about, really. The exception to that is if you're running KVM and just bare metal KVM. I think Scale and Nutanix are KVM based, but you don't require the virtual appliance for those. It's a virtual appliance that acts like an agent, and that's just a limitation of how we interact with KVM. If you're running vSphere, that includes vSphere, host directly, Hyper-V, Zen Server, any of the other ones, like I said, Scale, Computing, and Nutanix. I'll show you which ones we support in a minute. It's pretty much everything. You don't need to do that. So we'll talk about that more in the VDI section. Okay, so finally, let's go ahead and do the installation. I've already downloaded the installer file here to my desktop, very convenient, and I'm just going to run that. And we'll just go through the install. This is going to be pretty quick. Okay, here we go. So I'm almost going to take default. So I'm just going to go next. I always accept the license agreement because that's what I do. I go to next. You'll leave the default installation fine. Next. Right here, if you just go next, right on through, you'll have those three roles I talked about: the publishing agent, the gateway, and the RD session host. The tenant broker is a way to do kind of multi-tenancy and shared resources. We have a lot of documentation about that. It's beyond what I want to get into in this course, but we do cover it pretty extensively in our advanced training, which I'd encourage you to, if you're interested in any of those topics. So I'm going to skip over that now. I'm actually going to do a custom, mostly because I want to see what we're installing. So I'm going to go to next. And then you can see the publishing agent, the gateway, and the RD session host get installed. The VDI agent dedicated, I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. This is an agent that runs on our server here. And we're able to talk to the hypervisor environment using API. The guest agent, this would be for the VDI desktop itself. So I don't need that. It would be for like the Windows 10 image. It allows us to manage it. The PC agent would be for remote PCs. The enrollment service would be for SAML, and again, that's beyond what we're getting into here. Advanced training will cover that. It does install the console. It does install PowerShell console. We do support scripted. And the other one, which I think should be on by default, is the web administration service. We actually have a web interface now for administration. It's not for you, or I guess it could be for you. It's really meant for help desk personnel. It's pretty limited in terms of what it can do. I'm going to go ahead and install that so I can show you. Okay, so I almost took the defaults. The only thing I did was add the VDI agent and the web administration service. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click next. This is the warning page. It's telling me this is really for gateway. Gateways used to remember port 80 and port 4. We also use 3389. So the warning here says TCP port 3389 is in use. Yeah, it's because I already P'd into the system, right? I can get my, there we go. I'm on a Mac. I use the line to make a Mac and an RDP connection here to manage it. That's how it works. So I'm using 3389. It's fine. I had port conflicts here on port 80 or 443. If I was using a service that required them, IIS is the most notorious. We don't require IIS, so I recommend you don't have it on our servers, but if you need to, you can, because you can change the ports. But if you did have a port conflict here, You can go ahead and go on through. You just need to resolve it as before the gateway would be functional. And I'll show you how we can do that after the fact. The next step, this is a little checkbox that is a nice little wizard. I let it run. It's a shortcut. It will add all these firewall rules for me, so I don't have to do them manually myself or turn off the Windows firewall. So I'll go on to next. Single sign-on, I'm going to skip this and go next. That has nothing to do, by the way, as I click with single sign-on for the client. What that means is single sign-on into the administrator console. We had a very large customer that really wanted that feature, so we added it in, and there it is. I really don't use it myself. I often just click that says remember my password. I'm in a lab and I can do that. But they really wanted single sign-on. Oh, by the way, the console, where I guess it would be useful, is you can install it on your stations. It doesn't have to be on the server. So it can install on the Windows system anywhere, and they probably wanted to install it on their workstation and just have single sign-on there. They probably just used to remember my password, but it was important to them, and so we added it in there. Okay, so this is quick. You can see by the green bar, which is most of the way across now. Lost a lot of my status bars or progress. We're just about done. And once it's finished, like now, I can go ahead and click finish, and it will go ahead and launch the remote application server console for me, and I can set up. Every so often, I hear from somebody that as I clicked finish, nothing. The only thing I can think is they did this. Somehow they unchecked that, and then click finish, and get this. They're like, okay, what happened? Now what? Okay, yeah, the product installed, it just, the console didn't launch for whatever reason, probably because you unchecked the box. But it's here. If I go down to the start menu, and then right here, there's the Parallels Remote Application Server console. And since I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and pin it to my car. That way it'll be nice and convenient for me. And I'll go ahead and double click it, and we'll launch it. If I had checked that and clicked finish, it would have taken me right here. Farm, log into the farm. The farm name, by the way, is going to be the host name of the server. So whatever the host name of the server is, that's your farm name. I can change it, but that's just when we're getting started. So I can just type in localhost. This is my farm. That's just a friendly name for you. And then username and password. There's no default username and password. What we're doing here is creating the first administrator user. I'm going to use a domain admin account, but you don't have to use a domain admin account. The account you're using needs to obviously be a Windows account, so probably logged in with. It should have, or it must have, local administrator privileges on this server. And ideally, it would be a domain account so that you can integrate with Active Directory without having to type in additional passwords. All right, so I'm going to log in just as the domain admin because it has all of those, but it doesn't have to be a domain admin. And then hopefully I won't finger my password. And this, remember, I'm lazy. Okay, so that will log me in, create the user, and add them to the administrator section within the console, within it as administrator. And I will click connect. And here is the My Account. Remember the Parallels My Account that we talked about? I can go ahead and create one on the fly. And again, I think a lot of people just click register, and then they fill this information out, and they forget about it, and then that's perfect. It's great to do in a POC, to do getting started, test environments. Just forget, you don't tie to just you. You could, leave, get hit by a bus, who knows? So let's go ahead and do it to get started, but then create a service account, set users that I showed you, and add other users to it so that for business continuity, we don't have it tied to just a single person. I happen to have an account already, go figure. So I will use that. Again, providing I don't fat finger a password, we should be good. So then I'll go ahead and click sign in. And hey, type my password incorrectly. It's always a good day. So if I had a license key, I could just go ahead and plug that in now. But really what I'm going to do is I'm just going to activate a trial version. I'm running off a trial version for Windows Remote Desktop Services. I'm going to run off a trial version of RAS. This, by the way, is a great thing to activate if you're doing the labs on your own. It's completely full. We don't cripple it any way except for, I think it's 50 30 days. You get a full month. So that's this system will last that long. So couldn't connect, go out and authenticate our license servers and activate successfully. A system that can talk to the internet for security purposes. You can still activate the product, but you do have to go through support. Our support team can do an online or an offline activation for you. But like everything, it's easier if you're connected to the internet. Okay, so here's the remote admin server console. I get a note here that I don't have any servers registered in the farm to host published resources. Yep, thank you. I'll show you what that is in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And then let's go ahead and blow this up full screen and see what's going on. If I wanted to get rolling very quickly, I could just go right down the wizard piece here. But let me show you. Let me show you kind of what's going on. So if you haven't been under the covers before, we put our icons up and down. These icons up and down the left-hand side, those are the menu system. So we put our menus up and down here under these icons. The icons are called categories technically, but that's where they are. And if I go to farm, you can see my farm name at the top is RazCert-01. And I also have a site. Remember, we created a site, RazCert-01. I've created, during the install, a gateway and a publishing agent, and I can see under farm and site, I have this nice dashboard that shows me everything that's going on. And yeah, I'm running on my same system here, and the agents are green. But we also installed a remote desktop session host agent, remember? And I already installed a remote desktop session host role on this server, but it's not here. I just haven't tied those two together. And because it's not listed here, that's why I got that little warning. So I could just use the wizard, right? I could go up here to start. Yep, that's the same warning again. And I could just click on add remote session host, and then I can type in the name of my server here. And I could use Active Directory to find it if I want. And I believe this is RazCert-01. Let's check the names. Yep. And again, this is a good reason to use a domain account, so you can do stuff like this. I'll go ahead and click OK. And I click on the little green plus to add it. And the agent's verified, I know, because we installed it, right? It didn't install on the server. It also isn't coming back and telling me that the remote desktop session host role isn't there. So I can go ahead and click next. This little wizard, we've already done it, but add the firewall rules, that was done during the install. I'll show you why this might be important if I'm pushing it. Again, it can install that remote desktop session host role for you. So if we hadn't done it manually, or I had actually done it on this server previously, just to say there's a reboot, we could do that here. The desktop experience is enabled on by default on 2016 and 2019. But earlier servers, it wasn't. And what the desktop experience does, well, if you're publishing a full desktop, you're giving your end users a server desktop, and the desktop experience makes it look more like a workstation desktop. So it gives your users a better end user experience, but it also makes a lot of your apps look better for whatever reason. So we really recommend having that on. If it's not on automatically, we can enable it. RDSH, if you install that, remember it requires a reboot. Yep. And if I want to add the servers to a remote desktop session host or to a RAS group, then I can do that here. And I can even create groups on the fly. I'm just going to leave the defaults here. This actually is going to do absolutely nothing because all of this is done. So when I click next, it wouldn't work. It takes me to this. Remember, I have to have my users in the remote desktop users group. They have to be there in order to be able to have access to the server. This is not my administrator users. This is my users. Just saying, hey, anyone who authenticates can have access to this. I can go further and control who sees what, if anything, if I want. But this means they have the potential to log in. I'm going to leave this here. The authenticated because I'm at a lab. You can always go to the local users and groups, remote desktop users group, or the domain level or whatever, and make changes there if you need to. Okay. Next, I said this actually won't do any of this stuff. Right? These are all those checkboxes I enabled because it's already done. So it's really just did a quick check. But to add it, it's going to pause the service real quick. It is checking, and then this should just finish in just a second. Okay, so that quick, like I said, it was done. It really didn't have anything to do. I'll click done, I'll click finish, and we always click apply, and it's up and running. So now if I go to farm and then site, you can see that it's right here. The status is not applied. I'm going to drag these out so we can kind of see what they can give us, you know, the discrete time, CPU memory. It's there, it just is catching up. If I click this refresh up top right, the dashboard just caught up, but it's working. If I go back to my menu, if you need to get up and running real quick, I could go ahead and publish applications here, and this invite users will integrate with your mail server, and then you can actually send end users out an invitation. This application is now online. Click here, and it'll walk them through the client access process. I'll show you what the client access is like in a little bit. But we have a fully functional server here that's up and running. So let's go ahead and actually publish some applications. I'm going to go in the traditional way. So I'll just go into publishing, and then we hide these little blue plugs all over the place. This one in particular is down at the bottom with this nice little add to it. So I'll click add. I'm going to do an application. It is coming from a remote desktop session host. Choose installed applications. If I chose single application, go browse and find the executable. Predefined application is the little list of commonly used one like Windows Explorer that we have. Installed applications, if I go next, it will actually query the inventory installed on the system. In the site, all one of them that we have right now, but if other servers leave that setting, it can actually give them the application from any of my servers. I can choose that group. So if I wanted to choose the groups, I could group those here, or I could actually cherry pick individual servers. I'm just going to go next. This is where we query those inventory, and it's going to come back very quick. And if we look at it, I've got Chrome. There's really nothing on this system. It is it's down clean. So I'll go to accessories, and I don't know, here's paint, WordPad. There we go. That's my speakers. We don't hear that anymore. And that's done. And I'll go ahead and click next, and finish. And there they are. Applications are published. And click apply. So the end users can access these right now. That's really all I have to do. So let me minimize this. And I don't need to open the farm again. I'll click twice. But let me go to Google Chrome. And then I'll just open up a web page here. So I'll go to https:// and then the host name of my server. There is a self-signed certificate installed automatically for S connection. That's what this is. I'll go ahead and go through this. You would obviously replace that with a real cert once you're ready. And then I can log in. So I happen to have some users. By the way, the username here, we use the UAC format. We don't use the old NetBIOS. So if you're going to log in using the domain, you have to put in the full domain name like that. You don't have to use the domain because I'm using the May West account, and there is no local May West account. It exists only because it's not in big, so I don't actually type in the domain. If I typed in it here, if it was the administrator on the local site or the domain I'm using, if I hadn't renamed that. So, but I don't have to do that for this. There's no local username that, so I will go to my password and log in. And real quick, it's the tab. You can see my apps are right there. And it's going to prompt me to install it. So for the end user, this is going to feel like a browser plugin. It's not a plugin, but it'll feel like it. So I'm going to go ahead and click install the client and download. And then once it downloads, I can just go ahead and run it. So the end users could do this. It's really easy. And it's just going to run because it feels like a program there. And I'll just go next, accept this, next, install. This will finish very quickly. I don't know what's going on with my system with that little message, but that's fine. I'm going to uncheck launch the client and click finish. And then I'll close this out. Google, that's probably what it was. Google Chrome telling me that it's calling an external program. Right? Yeah, I know I am. I'm using the. They used to have a nice little checkbox there that would make that go away, and they took it away in the later versions of Chrome. But that's effectively what. So now, because I have the client on, I can access these applications in one of two ways. So let's do Paint. I will right-click on Paint, and the first thing I can, I've got two options. I can open it with the Parallels client, or I can go clientlessly, which is this. I'm going to show you the clientless version first. So let me open this up. Okay. Had to create a session on the server and it had to log me in. So here's Paint, but look where Paint is. Paint is here. It's in the taskbar of my browser. Right? And I could draw a quick little masterpiece or something if I want, and do that. And then if I want to save it, I'm running the browser really. Let me back up a minute. So I'm running completely contained with, I can multi. So if I want to launch another application like Calculator, move Calculator over here. I've got Paint running here. I can save my masterpiece here. So I will just go ahead and save it, and I will call this my masterpiece, and I'll put it in my documents folder. Again, this is my documents on the server, which is why you probably want to have the file management systems such as FS Logix running. I'll go ahead and click Save. So now I've got my masterpiece in here. The reason I did that is I wanted to show you something that's pretty cool. You see this little chevron down here? If I click that, this actually allows me to transfer files on and off the server. So if I click this little download, I can go into my documents, and here's my masterpiece that I just created. If I click Open, look what it just did. And I'll go ahead and close this. Let me minimize Paint. It downloaded it. So now on my local system outside of the browser, right, I go into my downloads. There's my masterpiece. So I can transfer files on and off that server. The other one up there was the, you can see was just the clipboard. If I want to copy small amounts of text, then I can also use the upload using the browser functions to upload it. The other thing I can do within Paint with this is printing also works right out of the box. So I just go to File and Print, and even though I'm in HTML5 only mode, if I choose this 2x universal printer, it's going to print and come right out my whatever my default printer is on my workstation. So just that quick, I'm up and running. I'm published an application. I've accessed it. Printing works. I can transfer up if I need to do that as an end user, and I'm good to go. Now, so we're thinking, wait a minute, I don't want him doing that. We can take this away. I can cut all this off, and I'll show you the RAS policy. So if you do not want them to have the ability to transfer files on and off the server, you can. So you can stop doing that. So that's some features in the clientless piece. A couple other little things up here. You notice these little layers and layers of applications and folders. I could just highlight star, account Paint. And now if I click my little favorites down here, they'll show up on my favorites. So that's a quick way where you can get if you. The other way I could do this, close these out. It's going to give me a disconnect, reconnect message, but I could use the client. So if I just right click and choose open with a client, or I honestly could just double click. That browser warning, there's no checkbox in Chrome anymore. So, and I'm going through the self-signed certificate, right? We'll go ahead and click yes. And I'm getting this disconnect, reconnect message simply because I shifted the modes. So now I'm using the power of the client. So Paint is open, but look at it. You can see it right here, and I've got the little Parallels double hot dog logo on it, but it's not running in my browser. Because I have the power of the client, I now have a more seamless experience. Let me get rid of this File Explorer behind it. But now I've got a more seamless experience with Paint. I get a little lag on my server. Usually wouldn't even see that. But now if I do things, I can do like multi-monitor. If I go to File and Save As, I don't have to use that little chevron. my, there you go, my local drives show up, right? See, these are the redirected local drives, as well as my documents and stuff on the server. I can make these go away too. I can use RAS policies and hide these. So they don't have to have the ability to transfer files off the server, but I certainly can have them do that. The other thing is, of course, that if I had USB devices, they also could show up in here. Like if I had a local USB drive, that might show up automatically if I redirected it, assuming you allowed it. In other devices, like a headset or whatever, microphone, that'll all work as well through this if I allow it. And again, multi-monitor works better. So that's kind of the client experience. Oh, one other thing, if I go to file print here, connecting on the server, so this isn't too exciting. But instead of printing to just my default printer, I have all my printers, and these are just the two Microsoft default printers that go nowhere. But if I actually had real printers defined, and I had more than one, I now have the ability to use all my printers locally. So I could pick and choose printer, black and white printer, the one in the copy room, whatever. Whatever my workstation is already defined, it'll work. So it's more than just the default printer. So those are some of the big things that the client gives you beyond the web interface. It's a little better performance over slower links. I break it out into its own applications, so I have a more seamless experience. That includes accessing my local drives. I have better device redirection. And with that better device redirection, I have the ability to print all my printers. The printing, like I said, notice it just worked right out of the box. I didn't have to do anything. I can go file, print, and go. So I don't know. I've been talking a lot, but if I hadn't been talking, how long would this take to get set up and running in applications? Probably less than half an hour, right? Okay, so that's the client integrated with the browser. And the other piece is just the client itself, right? There's no connections here enabled on it, so I'd have to manually do them. But here's a nifty little tool that we can use with the browser. If I go back into the browser, here's a little chevron up here that's for my user menu. Shows who I am. I can log out. If you need to change your domain password or your password, right, you get a message saying, hey, your password's expired. And you're like, how do I change my password from within Paint? You can't. Well, right here, you can go to change password. There's a few other things you can do in here too, called like the settings. If you want to have these are end user specific settings. There's no way to universally control them using HTML5 only. If you're using the client integrated, these don't matter so much because the client has its own settings. The big one for this might be keyboard mode. Every so often you've got an application, usually an older app with very specific fields, and the keyboard doesn't work. If you switch it to the PC keyboard, that often will fix it. The universal keyboard's a little bit better. These settings, like I said, are only really for the browser only. If you're using the client, don't worry about it. There's other ways to do things in the client. Anyway, I digress. User thing, click on download client. This time when I come into this window, I have a configure button, because the client's already there. And there's that Google Chrome warning, hey, open to the client only. And now, and I'll log in. It's picked up administrator because that's who I'm logged in as. Let me log in as May West, and then I just double click to connect, refresh, there we go. And there we go. So now all my applications are installed. I could come in through the client if I wanted to. So you can use the browser by itself, the browser integrated, or you can use the client by itself. And then the client, like I said, it lets you do a few things if I'm using the full client, such as right click and create shortcuts on the desktop for all visible applications. I'll go ahead and get rid of those. The other thing that the client gives you is if I go to tools and options, single sign-on. I can enable single sign-on. It does require a reboot of the system to do that, so I'm not going to do it here, but I could go ahead and enable sign-on. And with that, we have more than earned a break. So I'm going to go ahead and set the timer for 10 minutes. Let's do a 10-minute break. See you all back in 10 minutes. Have a good break, everyone. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a nice break. Let's go ahead and pick up. So we had installed a single remote application server, all-in-one server. We published the maps and we showed off the administrator console, or at least the beginnings of that, and then the three methods of doing client access, right? Clientless through HTML5, where you wouldn't even had to install the. Then we showed you the client integrated with the browser, which gives you the look and feel of the web browser, but also gives the client, and then using the client directly. With the client, I showed you that you could do single sign-on and then shortcuts on the desktop. But one other thing I didn't mention was if I click on the Start button here, and then go to the application desktop and applications, we can actually add them to the Start menu. That also requires the full client, not the basic client, but you can add it in here. So single sign-on and have shortcuts on the desktop or shortcuts added to the Start menu. That's about as seamless as an experience as you're going to get. The end users may not even notice that they have that going on there remotely. So it's pretty cool on that. Things with the web interface, you can actually customize this too, by the way. We're always happy to have you advertise parallels, but you can change the colors and the logos and go to you can modify this. So you can change it so it's got the look and feel so they feel like they're kind of logging into their own environment. It doesn't just have to be the default. The way to do that is, let's go back to the administrator console. I'll minimize the client here. Back into the admin console is again under farm and then themes. And then the default theme, if I want to modify it for everybody, I change the default theme. I go to HTML5 client, branding. Here's where you could update a new logo. You could even change the little icon that they'll see. That's this, you see on Paint, that little parallels the little hot dog logo there. There it is in the middle. You could even change that. And also I can do the colors, so that as well. And then if you want more than one theme, you can just add a theme and have a new theme. It gives you a slightly different URL, and the end users could log into that. So you could have different themes connecting to essentially the same farm. So a different look and feel for different organizations or customers if you want. Okay, now that we have this built out, our single all-in-one server, right? If I go back up to farm site, everything's hunky-dory. Let's go ahead and expand and add a second one. So let's create that second all-in-one server, and then we'll introduce the load balancer into the mix. So I'm going to go to farm and I'll go to publishing agents, and the easiest way to do this, plus up in the top right, I click the plus, and I will type in the name of the second server, which is RasCert02. And if I resolve it, it'll go ahead and do that. Now here's some shortcuts. If you want to create an all-in-one server, it's going to install the gateway, the RAS gateway with the publishing agent. So I don't have to do two steps if I'm creating all-in-one servers or if I'm doubling up the roles. If I'm breaking it out so that I don't want the RAS gateway and the publishing agent on the same server for scale, and that's really the only reason to do that, then I can uncheck that. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it checked. It'll configure the firewall roles. And remember, the HTML5 interface is turned on by default. I didn't have to install IIS or anything like that. So I'll go ahead and click next, and let's hope I remember to turn the firewall off. It's going to connect, it's going to time out and tell me that, hey, the agent's not installed. Do I want to install it? And I'm going to say yes, install. And it looks like it's going to go through just fine and do that. If it fails here, it's usually because the Windows firewall is on. If it still fails, it could be a permissions issue, a DNS issue, or perhaps antivirus is interfering with this. And notice that we're appending the FQDN. You'll see that when it's finished up here. It's not just, I typed in just the short name, the NetBIOS name, but it's actually going to append the FQDN. And just like that, it's done. So I'll go ahead and click done and OK. And there it is. Got a master and a secondary. And I'll go ahead and click apply. And it'll sync up. So not verified. And I just click refresh a couple of times. It's syncing the database. Remember, it deployed its own database, and that'll sync up in just a second. And if I go over to gateways, see that the gateways are already up and running and they're normal. So the gateways are done. And now if I go back to publishing agents, it's probably synced up, just about to. It takes a minute to get over there. The publishing agent will come back up and then there we go. And then I have a master and a secondary. So I have two of them, right? And again, if I want to switch them, I just simply right click on the master or the secondary and say promote to master. It's going to synchronize all the sites. It's going to prompt me to log in using my my account credentials. This is why it's really not a good idea for one person just to hold on to these. Hopefully I remember my password again. I'll click sign in. And it's doing this again because I'm changing essentially the MAC address. Okay, I'm going to break out of that because I can only do that off a real license and I want to plug one in. So I'll leave it alone. But that's really the process that we'd have, the master and the secondary. And like I said, the gateways are already up and running. If I go back to the publishing agent though, and right click and go to properties, if I had a third one deployed, this is where I could put that third one in standby mode. So remember, we only want two active in our environment or farm at any given time. So if you have a third, put that in standby mode, keep the network traffic down, makes it easier to sync the database, that kind of thing. So active, and then standby for that one. All right, if I go back to the gateways, and then I can right click and go to properties on the gateway, we can see what I deployed. This is just the IP information, the mode. Again, this has to do with that forwarding mode versus normal mode that I talked about earlier. Really don't want to change that here. By the way, our nomenclature, this is pretty easy to figure out. If I change the site defaults, it changes them for all the gateways. If I'll cancel, so I go back. If I uncheck this, then I'm changing it only on this gateway, when on both of them. So, but I could switch this to forwarding mode. Remember, that's for putting in the DMZ that gets kind of complicated that we really don't recommend doing. So really nothing to change here. If you'd had a conflict on port 80 on the network tab, this is where I would change that. So I could switch it to port 80 if I wanted. If you really want to be secure, I can change the RDP port from 3389 to, I don't know, something else. Remember, that is goes to the internet, so it's something that I've actually never seen anybody do, but you could do it. Just remember, if you do it here, you also have to change it on the remote desktop server. Okay, I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not going to change either of these ports because we're fine. The SSL tab, this used to be where we would configure the SSL certificates, but here I don't have to do it anymore. And we talk more about certs in the advanced training. But if I needed to change the SSL certificate, I could, or a port number, I could switch this from here, 444, 4040, whatever, if I had a port conflict. So I could do that. Or if I wanted to use a different port, I could do that. And then the next tab is the HTML5 interface. It is on by default. So if you want to turn it off, you can. And again, site defaults, I can turn it off for everybody or just this one gateway. The default setting, let me check this so I can show you what the settings are. The default setting, by the way, for the client is what we just did. Launch applications with a parallels client. That's the preferred method, but it gives the users to launch HTML5 only if you want. Remember, I did the right click and shows the open in HTML5 only, the client list. That wouldn't require the client. I can force them to go one way or the other, right? Hey, only use the HTML5. I don't want you installing clients anywhere. So I don't want to deal with it. Web interface works perfect. HTML5 only for you. Or maybe the other method is, I've got an app, I've got scanning, we've got stuff we got to do. I don't want people going in HTML5 only and getting confused and then complaining because they can't scan. So I'm going to force them to use the client. So you can kind of leave them in the option mode as the default, but I can force one way or another. And then remember that file upload and download in the clipboard? Here's so you can turn that off. Nope, you're not transferring stuff off my server. It's secure. It's staying on the server. Right? I'm taking that away. So you can shut that off. I can shut off the others using RAS policies, which I'll get to in just a minute. So that's that part. Let me go ahead and cancel out of this. So I've deployed two gateways. Real quick, certificates. We moved this centrally now. So farm certificates. The product ships with a self-signed certificate. If you're happy with that for testing, that's good. For a proper certificate, which I would recommend if you're going to be accessing over the public internet without a VPN, go to certificates. I click on the blue plus up here. I can generate a new self-signed certificate if I have to. If I'm going to go create a certificate, I would generate a certificate request, the CSR, fill this out, and we can use wildcard certs, by the way, but if you're going to do it otherwise, this is what you'd fill out. You copy, you paste it into your certificate provider, GoDaddy, DigiCert, whatever. We support pretty much all the major ones. There are some of the free, cheap ones that we don't support, but pretty much all the major ones we do support, a huge list of them. Fill this out, and that gives you the certificate that you could then copy and paste into your provider. They're going to ask for that as well. Once that's done, I just go up to plus, import the certificate, and then I would bring it in and decide if I wanted to assign to the gateway or the load balancer, usually the gateway. Okay, that's that part. The load balancer, let's do that. So I go to farm and HALB. I would need to enable the HALB. This is the virtual IP address. So I'm going to assign 10.228. I'm going to use an internal address on .40. This is assigned to nothing else on my network, right? But it's a valid address, so it is just a virtual IP address. I can configure it here. I don't have to use my networking to do this. And then I will, I'm on a class C subnet, so I'll get that set. Next, I choose what I want to load balance. Well, if I want to load balance port 80 connections, I go to here, configure, and then check for my two gateways here coming in over port 80. I click OK. I will load balance my SSL connections, same thing, check, configure, 443, check, and OK. That's done. The only other thing I have to do actually is go find the load balancer. So I would go up to devices, and I click on the blue plus up here. And because it's on the same subnet, I can find it. And this one is available. I knew I had one that was available. I've got many different lab things running in the environment. So I'll go ahead and choose this one that's available that I pre-configured. I click OK. And I click apply. That's it. I actually can now have people start making connections to this .40 address. Let me break out of this real quick and show you the load balancer itself. So I'm going to go back into my web browser, and I'm going to go into vSphere, and it's right here. And I've actually launched the virtual console for us. So this is it. All I did was power it up. I imported it into vSphere. I turned it on. I assigned an IP address using the menu system here, right? So I went through the menu system, and it's just an arrow key, enter key. It's a very simple one. And I went through here and I gave it an IP address, which you can see is .45. The agent itself is running, but the other services are not configured. They actually are. They will be configured once I add it, but it just hasn't updated because it's just a simple Linux menu screen, right? So I just click in here, I go to advanced. And this is where I can set up or change the networking if I wanted. If I need to reboot it, do it here. Reset will set it back to its basic defaults. But really all I need to do is use the arrow key and go back. That refreshed this menu, and you can see that everything is running, happy. And then look at the IP address. It will answer not only to the .45 address, but it'll also answer to the .40 address, which is the virtual IP address that I used. So if I break out of this now, remember when I originally connected, I used just rascert01. Now I can actually type in http colon 10.228.13.40. We have a redirect. So if you can reach the gateway server over at port 80, it will redirect it to port 443. The HTML5 interface only uses port 443. When I click enter, it will redirect, and I go advanced and proceed through it, and there we go. And I'll log in with somebody else this time, Lauren McCall. Assuming I didn't fat finger that password. And yep, the client's already installed on this system, but there's my apps. So that's it. So now I could use this, and I could end up on either one of the gateways. It'll redirect me back and forth. Obviously, for external access, I'd create a NAT probably to this, and then, have some URL DNS name, so we wouldn't have to remember an IP address out there. That's it. All right, let me minimize this. So now if I go back to my console, and I go to farm and I go to my dashboard at site, I can see I've got everything running, right? The Help is updated. I've got 2 gateways, 2 publishing agents, and a load balancer, and redundant everywhere, except I've only got 1 RD session host. So the last time I showed you how to do it using the Start Wizard, I could actually do it from here. So if I go to Farm, RD Session Hosts, I click on this blue plus up here, and then I'm going to add in my second server, which is rascert-02, I think, and click the blue plus, or the green plus. It's not verified. I do have the RDSH role already installed on it. Remember, that's a server I did earlier, but there's no agent. So I'll just go ahead and click next, and it will do everything like I mentioned earlier. Firewall rules, install the RDSH role in the desktop experience, and reboot the server if required. I've already done it. I'll add it to my group, and then I go next. Here's the authenticated users, where it adds in the users into the local desktop users group, remote desktop users group, and I click next and next. Yep, and pushing the agent out. All right, the MSI file copied over there, it ran, it's successful, we're done. So just like that, I click finish, I click apply. Okay, yeah, just a screen refresh. So I have 2 all-in-one servers and the load balancer. That's it. Done, right? Finished with everything. Okay. So if I want to change things a little bit, I can rename the farm. If I go up to farm and go under tasks, I can rename the whole farm. I could rename sites. I have just 1 site. Remember, a farm and a site. If I want to deploy a second site, I go to farm, under farm, click on the blue plus, and then I think I called this, site. This is the friendly name. I'm just going to call it site 2 because I'm creative like that. And then I think I called it cert-site2. Let's find out. Yes, I did. Look at that. Okay. My memory hasn't completely failed me yet. So it's going to go ahead and push a publishing agent and the gateway over. So if I go to next, it's going to ask me to do the install just like we did before. Click install. Hopefully I turn the firewall off. Okay, and it's done. So I'll go ahead and click done. And okay. Always click apply. I click apply. And now it's okay. So, but look, here's how you manage it, right? I'm at farm, and everything I do is on site 1, that rascert-01 that I haven't renamed yet. If I want to manage the other site, I go up to farm, highlight the site, right click, and say switch to this site. Now everything I do is under site 2, and there's no RD session host here, right? I haven't added them yet, or VDI or anything else like that. So that's how you can kind of tell. So everything I do now is controlling site 2. And then if I go back up here, yeah, it's got some CPU issues on that one. And I can go ahead and switch back to site 1. So single pane of glass management, but I deploy it from here. And then once you're in site 2, you can just manage it normally. The other thing I can do is if I want to make that the licensing site, here I can switch to the licensing site. I'm not going to do this, but it's the same process I showed you as promoting it. It's going to make me log in with my password. It really doesn't like it. If I'm using a just an activated version, I need a key to kind of go forward with that. Okay, so that's both sites. That's all that. We're done with the basic infrastructure. Okay, so let's look at a couple other things here real quick on publishing. So if I go down to farm and publishing, I've got my applications right here. I can organize them into folders, right? So I could just go create a new folder, and I'll call this mission critical apps. Finish. And mission critical apps will of course paint and WordPad and calculator. Those are all mission critical apps, right? So I'll leave Chrome outside. So now if I click apply, and then I minimize, and I go back to my browser, You don't have to refresh the whole browser, by the way. We have this little refresh right here. It organized my apps into a folder. So now I've got them in a folder, and I can back up a level. Those that are my favorites, I can still access here. Remember I did a little star earlier? So I can still access the favorites. So that's all good. That's what that does. The other cool thing about folders, it's a fairly new feature that I've been very happy about. If I click on the folder tab, I can make it an administrator folder. Apply. What does that do? Let's go back to our browser. It organizes my applications administratively, but if I click on this refresh, the users don't see the folder, right? So it's an administrator folder. Why would I want to do that? Well, not only does it help you keep things organized up here, but I can do something known as filtering. So what is filtering? By default, everybody that has access to this system will have access to all the applications. I limit who sees what by applying a filter. So if I check allow the following users, the most common filter is a user filter, which if you look at the bottom is really a user and group filter. So it probably should say user and group. But I check that, I click on the little blue plus, and only the users that I put in here will be able to see this application. I can also do this, by the way, at the application level. So if I go into Paint, and I go into filtering, and I'll show you some of these other options in a minute, and I click on allow the following, and I click on the little blue plus up here. Only domain admins get to paint. Nobody else gets that. So go ahead and click apply. And if we go back to our browser, and I click refresh, Mae West is not a domain admin. She doesn't get paint. So if I log off, I'm going to quit the application, and I log on as an administrator. And remember, administrator could be a local admin, so I do need to specify the domain here. And I log in. Now I can see Paint because I'm a domain admin. Mae West can. So that's kind of filtering. Let me go back to the console again. I can also have other filters that I can apply, like where it's coming from. The very common one, for instance, is the IP address. I check this, and I add an IP address range. You can paint at work, but you can't at home. You know, that more common use would be like a financial application. I'm a member of the finance group, so I can get into the financial app, but I can only see it in the office. I can't see that at home. I can do other stuff at home, like check my mail or paint, but I couldn't see the financial app if I came to the office. One other thing that kind of bites people, go ahead and click apply. I go back up here and I said, oh, that was kind of a cool thing to do. And I go back to the administrator. Yep, domain admins. All right, let me log in as a domain admin. I'm just going to refresh. And why don't I see Paint? Remember the domain admins group? What's going on? I go back over here. Here's what went on. These filters layer together. And in the IP address, I checked this to show you guys, and I didn't uncheck it. So I had it checked, and there was no addresses in here, so Paint was really secure. Nobody could see it. So if I clear that, I'm going to go back up to user just so I don't forget later. And then now if I refresh, there's Paint. Okay. So just something disappears and it's acting wonky, make sure you check all those filters because that can get you. A couple other things that we can do as we go through here. If I go to publish from, I could change where it's publishing from. It's all servers in a site, but if I had a specific group of servers, remember how I grouped them, I could modify that. I could also cherry pick individual servers. On the application tab, if I hadn't chosen the easy button and did the Windows query by doing an installed apps, it'd make me fill all this information out on my own, including finding the .exe file. The other thing I can do here that's pretty cool is if there's any switches or parameters, I can add them here. And then sometimes this gets people, if you have an application that is like and not launching for other people and it's seemingly random, why is it failing? Come in here and click verify targets, and I can see that Paint, in fact, is installed on both my servers, but maybe I forgot to install it on one of my servers. Oh, That's why that would fail, right? Or I installed it into a different directory. Remember, because it's calling it using just the default. They all have to be in that same directory. So install your apps the same on all your servers, folks. But that could be common reasons. So use that verify targets. That can help you out. Quick keypad. What that is it's actually a macro. So if I go to the quick keypad here, I can create a macro for, I don't know, just paint. So it's going to be assigned to only paint, and then I can create shortcuts. So undo is the label, and then I will actually hold my control key and press Z, and that's undo. Click OK, and apply. And then I go back under publishing, and I could assign just this. Forget to click apply. Just paint, apply. Oh, it's because I went. Just let me pop back out of it real quick. That'll refresh the screen. So there we go. Just the screen refresh. Paint. I meant to put paint. So it's just paint. So only paint would see this, but where would I see it? Only on a mobile client, like an iPhone or an iPad or an Android tablet or a phone. That's where I'd see it. It would pop up on the virtual keyboard. I would see a little button at the top of my virtual keyboard that said undo. We have a very brilliant experience on our mobile devices, by the way. I highly encourage you to kind of take a look at those. Okay, so that's this one. I showed you filtering, shortcuts. Look at the default here. If I uncheck the default, create shortcuts in the start folder. So if you're using the client, it's going to do that. And that's why I showed you earlier that it went ahead and put these in here. If you're using the client, it's going to go ahead and put them in there by default. If you don't want that, uncheck it. You also can, by the way, you could add it in the auto start folder too. So auto start for them. There's different ways to make apps auto start, by the way. You also can, go app by app. So see, I did the inherit default settings, so I could have just a couple of apps put into there, not all of them. And then some of these other settings you can kind of look at and cover, but for the most part, that's really kind of publishing apps and how you would access them. All right, so let's move down a little bit. We've talked about printing already, universal printing. I showed you how that works, right? Where if you're in the HTML5 only interface, you go File, Print, you pick 2x Universal Printer, and it comes out your default printer. If you're using the Parallels client, you go File, Print, and you see all your printers. This printing solution is built right into Parallels RAS. You don't have to do anything, as I showed you, to set it up. It just generally works right out of the box. If you go down to the universal printing to look at the settings, you can see where it's pulling that pattern from, right? The printer name for the username by Parallels. If you come over here to these three dots, you can adjust the pattern if you'd like, perhaps tying it to the client name instead of the username if you have people floating around at different workstations and you want the workstation just having a connection. Be careful playing with this a little bit. If you do, it will generally work just fine, but if you get a little typo in here, it can kind of mess things up. If that happens, it does affect everybody. To recover from that, you can always go back to click default and it'll bring you right back here and you're working. So the way printing works, like I said, what we do is we just, when a client logs in, we enumerate their print drivers on their client system. And then we capture the print job, we pass it down to the client system, and then we just let the local drivers interface with the printer. So you don't have to install drivers up here. In fact, you don't install drivers up on the server or any of the servers. It should just kind of work right out of the box. We have this setting here called printer retention. You can turn it on or off. It's kind of one of those settings. It's a two-edged sword, so it just depends on what works best in your environment. If you turn it off, which is the default setting, then every time a client logs on, we're going to go through the printer enumeration process. It kind of happens in the background, but it could be a few moments before a lag before the printers are mapped. So a client logs on, they start working. It'll take a few minutes, perhaps, for the printers to present to the to the end users. They won't be there necessarily instantly. If you turn it on, then we'll remember that the printers are there, and when the clients connect, the printers are there automatically. So that sounds like a better setting, right? And in many use cases it is. But if the users are floating between different workstations, that can provide a little bit of problem, assuming that the printers workstations on the different printers are different. Even then, we enumerate them differently because it's a different workstation. So if you have users that are always at the same workstation, might be a little quicker for them if you set that on. If you have people that tend to float around a little bit or occasionally go work from home or other devices, turning it off might be the better setting there. But that's pretty much all you need to do with that. These other settings, like printer drivers, you really don't need to get into the setting at all. I've never seen it turned on. Effectively, what you're doing here is switching the mode so that I am loading printers up here. Typically, if you go down this path, you're already on the phone with support. Remember, you have support included 24/7, 365, so call support first before you come into here. They're really talented at getting that last printer or two up that perhaps isn't redirected. Like I said, I have never seen this used in many years. We've done a lot of work updating the printing subsystem. The fonts, this one could be interesting. These are a list of fonts that we don't redirect per se because they're installed on pretty much, they're excluded from redirecting or from embedding rather. Simply because they're included on just about every possible workstation out there in the world. If you have specialized fonts, a very common use case would be a barcode, right? Perhaps you're printing barcode labels. That would be a specialized font. In that case, you would want to come in here and install them, auto add the fonts up to the system. The good thing is you only need to do something like that on this server console here. I don't have to go out to every remote desktop server and do that. I just do it in one place and it happens across the entire farm. So if you have a specialized font like that, you could do it here. Otherwise, for most general use case fonts, it works right out of the box. And again, you don't really have to do anything with printing. Moving down to scanning very quickly, it works very similarly to universal printing, except it only works for Windows workstations. So if you're using HTML5 only, there's no way to scan. And if you're coming from a non-Windows client, there's no way to scan. Although I believe we're adding support for scanning for Macs coming a little bit later in the year. I believe that is going to be the case. But right now, as of this moment, it is purely just Windows workstations. We can scan in two modes or redirect two different types of scanners via WIA and Twain. You'll notice I'm on the WIA tab and they're disabled, the two servers that we added. And the reason for this is that scanning with WIA requires the Microsoft desktop experience, which we enable by default. And specifically, there's a setting underneath that called Ink and Handwriting Service. It's a feature under Add Rules and Features. So you need to have that on in order for this to work if you're using this. That's why they're disabled, because we're not sure if it's on or not. In the 2016 and 2019 version, those are on by default. So I literally don't have to go back and do anything. With Microsoft side, I can just right click. And if you're doing WIA printing, it works. So this works pretty much out of the box, provided that you just remember to enable those settings. And if you're on like a 2012 R2 or earlier setting, you need to go add that as a role and feature at Microsoft. For Twain, which is obviously what most people use, the one thing you do need to do here is go down to the Twain Applications button. So under Scanning Twain, the Twain Applications button, and then explicitly list the applications here that are using Twain. And again, just this one spot, you don't have to go out and do it server by server, just right here, and that'll work for your entire farm. But you need to list your applications here that will be using Twain scanning. That will enable that redirection. Occasionally you'll find somebody or you come across an application that's a very large app, like an EMR app, electronic medical records, or something like that. A lot of times those very large apps, they have a specific printing or a scanning subsystem. So if you just list the main executable, that actually isn't going to work here. You have to find the executable that actually is for this scanning subsystem. You can refer to your documentation or the vendor to help you find that. But if you're having trouble with that, it's probably because there's a specific subsystem for scanning that you need to use. Okay. Let's break out of this part and move on. I'm going to skip down to policies because let's say you don't want people printing or you don't want them scanning. We have a way to deal with that using RAS policies. And I showed you kind of a little bit of one where we could turn off that little chevron for the upload download in the browser. But the really strong way to do this is through the RAS policy. So if I go to policies and then I'll click on our little blue plus up here in the top right to add a policy, this is the policy window. So the first thing is you see this little blank box over here with a blue plus. This is where you set who the policy applies to. So if I click that blue plus, it opens up an Active Directory users and computers, or Active Directory dialog box for users and groups, computers as well. And I put in here who I want this policy to apply for. I could put in domain users, so it applies to everybody. I could have different policies for different subsets of users. And then everything that we can control is down here on the left-hand side. So I can scroll up and down and see everything that I want to control. So if I don't want people printing, I would click on printing here and then set this, instead of RAS universal printing, to none. Guess what? Everybody that's this policy applies to now cannot print, at least print locally. If you have network printers defined on the server, they can still do it that way, but this would prevent their printers from being redirected. So the way this works is if I check this box over here where it says printing, that means I'm controlling the policy. And then over here is actually what I'm having it do. So if we look at the client very quickly, let me cancel out of this just for a second and go into the client. Most of these settings are mirrored here under right-click and connection properties. There's the printing section. If I had applied a policy and that printing box was checked, this printing would disappear. This printing tab would disappear. It would prevent the end users from setting this on their own. They're taking the centralized policy. So most of those tabs line up to, let me get back into policies here, line up to these settings over here. There's a connection, display, here's the printing, scanning, and so forth. So if you check it over the left, it means applying the policy, and then what we're actually applying is on the right. You can do that with scanning. Perhaps the most popular policy is down here under local devices and resources and disk drives. Remember, by default, their local drives on their client system will be available for them to transfer files on and off the server. That's great in a lot of environments, but if you're in a secure environment and you don't want to do that, then doing that, right, stuff on the server stays on the server. We need to be HIPAA compliant here or whatever. I uncheck that. Now their local drives will not be redirected, and there's nothing the end users can do about it. Devices. I do not want you being able to plug in any devices that you may be able to do that in. That's disabled. Clipboard redirection. I'm going to stop that so you can't do copy paste. Right? I can really get down here and very granularly control this. The file transfer. That's that transfer command that we saw in HTML5. I could also set that here. Okay. So there's a lot of features that you can kind of go through here. Another one is multi-monitor. It's on by default. You know, if somebody's irritating you one day, perhaps you could be a little passive aggressive and take away their second monitor until they're nicer to you. I mean, you can get in here and do as powerful as you like. A couple other settings that are very interesting. One of them is session pre-launch. This does work only with Windows clients for security purposes, but effectively what it does is when users come in the morning, we can study what they turn machine learning on and realize that, okay, you're going to be, every user comes in and they typically log in and start launching apps right around 9 a.m. on Monday morning. Okay, that takes some time because it puts some stress on the servers. You have everybody logging in pretty much at the same time. Machine learning does two things. One of them is we realize that that's what people are doing. And so we would start logging them in a little earlier so that when they do come to work, you're not getting a login storm because the sessions have been created over time in a nice staggered fashion. So we're not overwhelming the server. It reduces the compute power that you need. Thing is the users are happier because they come in and they just connect to something that's already up and running. They're not having to wait to initiate that Windows logon process into the RD session host server. So a very cool tool. Machine learning just simply means that we will figure it out. It takes about 2 weeks for us to capture enough data for that to really start taking effect. So you'll often see performance increases after about 2 weeks or so. If you know exactly what's going on, you can come in here and do basic and click plus and set up your own schedule if you'd like. but I'd recommend using the machine learning piece. And one other coming down here very quickly is under the experience program, we can turn on kind of compression. Um, Typically, we detect the connection quality automatically, and then we'll kind of adjust that on the fly. We do start high and then kind of step down as you need to. But a lot of times you'll get better better experience if you know that you've got a remote office and they've got a fairly slow pipe. If you go ahead and just preemptively up front set this down to like WAN speed or something, right? We're going to set this here, and that's going to optimize the end user's experience for that connection that they have. And that way, everybody's kind of getting the same experience. So if you have a situation like that, sometimes it's better to turn this down as opposed to leave it set to detect the connection quality automatically. The other one in here, you got to be careful with is LAN speed. If you set it to that, they're going to have a very nice connection, but your network better be able to handle it. It's going to fire hose it at them. So sometimes that's good if everybody's in the office and they're just want to, you're like, okay, I don't want to hear any calls about this stuff. I'm just going to fire hose it out to them. They're going to get the best possible thing over the network. It's good then, not so great if you've got mixed scenarios or things like that. The other one real quick to talk about is the compression. This is for scanning and printing, but it's effectively setting trade-offs. So typically we'll balance those trade-offs for you, which is the default setting based on connection speed. But you could do something like, users are complaining about print jobs taking a little while or scan jobs. I want to make it faster. I can just say, use best speed. All right, what does this do for us? Well, it's going to disable compression, which also takes some pressure off your server because you're not having to use the CPU to use the compression. It's going to come out of their printer faster or their scanner faster or from their scanner faster, but your network's going to take the hit. So if your network can handle it, you can do that. If your network's not going to handle it, maybe you do something like best size, right? That's going to use less network traffic, but it's going to increase the CPU utilization on the server because you're having to actually work to compress the document really tightly, and it's going to be slower coming out, but it does take pressure off your network. Best thing is I typically just leave it here as set. We'll balance the network speed with the CPU utilization, the network traffic, the speed coming out the printer or into the scanner, etc. That's a good all-round setting. But if you want to get in here and kind of tweak with that and play with those trade-offs, you certainly can. Okay, time for another break. So I'm going to put the 10-minute timer up again. We'll do about 10 minutes, and then we won't have too much longer when we come back, maybe about a half hour. All right, have a good break, everybody. Thanks. All right, hope you all had a good break. Let's go ahead and pick up and get started again. We've got about 30 minutes left. We'll get this wrapped up. We're going to go through VDI, and we're going to do monitoring and reporting, and that should take care of us. We should just make it. Okay, so VDI, Virtual Desktop Infrastructure, there are actually a lot of confusion around this topic. RAS is an all-in-one solution, so it includes VDI right out of the box. You don't have to purchase another license or anything or install another module to get that done, other than, remember, during the custom install, I added the agent for VDI to the server, and that allows us to integrate with hypervisors. Real quick, just to keep in mind, like I said, the confusion around VDI often is that there's several different ways that RAS can provide a virtual desktop to an end user. One of them, of course, is VDI. VDI, think about it as I'm providing a Windows 10 workstation to my end users, since that's what they need. But also, if I go here to publishing and add desktop, I can provide some different types of desktop experience to the end user. The first one is a remote desktop session host, a terminal server desktop. Effectively, what we were doing with applications, except we're giving them the full desktop. Why would I do that? Well, that actually would be a preferred method of doing things. It's a lot less infrastructure intensive on your part. It makes your life easier effectively. And what is this all about, really? But you can have many users sharing the same desktop, and they're each in their own profile, and you can use the profile management tool like I talked about with FSLogix, right? So they can have their own wallpaper, their own favorites, save things to their desktop or the My Documents folder, and it's very seamless for them. The one thing they can't do is use do things like install applications, anything that would affect other users at that level. They wouldn't be limited to. But if you don't need your users installing applications or being able to reboot stuff, then that's really a good solution, because it does keep the infrastructure costs down. It doesn't change your Parallels licensing at all, but it does keep your infrastructure costs down. The other way, of course, is the virtual desktop, which is what I'm going to demonstrate. And then don't forget about the remote PC. If you're like in a pinch and you need people to work from home very quickly, hey, often you can just use RAS to broker a connection to their PC in the office, their workstation in the office, and then they can connect from home from whatever. And then because their PC's in the office, you don't have to mess with network or anything like that. And of course, they can do all the other stuff I talked about, like if you wanted to print locally or transfer files, they can, or you can turn it off. Okay, so those are really the three ways. I typically, when I'm doing this, I always think about, I start with just applications. Can I give you end users applications? Is that enough? We're kind of trained for that nowadays too, right? There's an app for that. If that's it, then that's where I kind of stop. Applications, just like we were doing, it's the most efficient for me. They get what they need to work, and it's kind of, as I say, saves us money on the back end. If that's not the case, and I need to give them a little bit more, then I'll go to this setting right here, the remote desktop session host desktop. Now you got the desktop experience. That's pretty good. And then if that's not enough, then I go to VDI. So I kind of start with the apps, and then just, if I have to, I move to the next one, which is a remote desktop. And then if I have to, I move to the virtual desktop. Typically, to go to a virtual desktop, there's a few reasons why you might do this. One of them is end users need to be like a power user. They actually need their own environment where they can install apps and customize it and do their own thing. The second method might be, or reason might be, application compatibility. This app will only run on Windows 10 and it can't run in multi-user mode. And so therefore I have to provide them a Windows 10 desktop. And those are really the two big ones for doing that. Okay, so let's take a look at VDI. I'll break out of this. So if I go up to Farm and then we click on VDI, the first thing I want to do is integrate with the hypervisor. That allows me to see all the virtual machines. And Parallels is hypervisor agnostic, so I've got vCenter, I've got Scale, and you can pick and choose. You can see if I click on the little blue plus and go to virtualization, and then next, here's all the different hypervisors that I can integrate with. vCenter, ESXi standalone, Citrix Zen Server, KVM, Nutanix, Acropolis, Scale, etc. To do that, here's Hyper-V. I'll point to my Hyper-V server, and I think it's at this address. Hopefully, don't fat finger the password. Find out here in a second. Let me just enter that password to make sure. And let's see, next. Hey, it worked. Okay, and you can see that the agent is installed. That's because the agent is running on the server, and I'll go ahead and click finish, and then apply, and it'll sync up with the server. It'll take a few moments to do that. Okay, so it's synced up. Once that's done, and you can see I can do all three environments simultaneously. If I go down to the guest virtual machine list, it shows me all the virtual machines that are running in the environment, and I can even tell the provider so I can see which host it's coming from, but across all of them. Hyper-V, there's Scale, and there's vCenter at the top. The ones that say not verified are things such as my domain controller. Right? I don't need end users connecting to my domain controller, so I'm not going to put a RAS agent on them. The ones that say verified means I have a remote application server agent running on them, a VDI agent, if you will. All right, and you can see I've got a few in here. So that's essentially what that does. Once I have that integration, and I could have done things like power off and on the virtual machines from there if I wanted. Pools is kind of the old way of doing things. We left that in there because that's how we did it for years, but that's really just kind of backwards compatible. Let's go over to templates. I can create a template, and I already have a few created. So I'll just start, and then I'll go back and do one of the others to show you time, what I've already done. But you click on the little blue plus, I would come in here and I would pick a virtual machine, one of them that's ready to go, that's Windows 10 or remote desktop server or whatever. I would highlight that and I'd click OK, and it would convert it to a RAS template and open up a little wizard. What would the wizard settings be saying? Well, let's go ahead and look in the properties of this one. I can give it a name. That's the name of the template. Okay. And by the way, that name has to, of the virtual machine, has to match the host name of the system. Okay, Win10 Finance or whatever. So if I go here and look at vCenter, and I look at my virtual machine, W10 Fin, that's the VMware name. The host name, the Windows host name of this server also must be W10 Fin. Right? They have to match because we're enumerating this from the hypervisor, and then we're trying to connect to this over DNS. So if it's failing, this name has to be the same name as the Windows host name. Okay. All right, so that's got to match. Then how many virtual machines do I want to create? Well, in my little lab, I told it don't create more than 6 or else my hardware is going to explode, but you could put whatever number in here you want, right? Maximum of 100, 200, whatever. The buffer is how many do I want to keep available? So there's also another number that's how many do I want to start with? So let's see, 100 would be the max. Start with 10. And then the buffer means as users log on and are assigned a virtual machine, then we're going to create a couple of more. We'll create a couple of more. We'll create a couple of more. That way they're not waiting for the process to complete. It will just move on. And so they'll always have a couple in the buffer that they can connect to that's always unassigned to them. And then here, when it deploys, it's going to create the virtual machine name, W10 Fin, and this ID. And then it also is going to increment them as we go forward. So WFIN 001, 002, etc. And then I can choose what happens to the virtual machine if it's not used for a while. I've got mine set, hey, never delete this. But you could have it to scale down, right? After 30 days, it's been a month, nobody's logged into this virtual machine. I think they're gone. Let's go ahead and blow it away and create some disk and save some disk space. And then you have the choice between a full clone or a linked clone. Full clone, just the full clone we all know and love, right? We're going to go ahead and clone the virtual machine, deploy a clone from that. It's going to use a RAS prep or a sys prep. If I go over here under preparation, you can see the difference where I can choose that. RAS prep is the default. Sys prep, you could also use sys prep, right? It just rolls back the virtual machine so we can get the new security identifiers. RAS prep does the same exact thing, except it's a little bit more efficient. Sys prep requires a few more reboots than RAS prep. We've managed to make it without as many reboots. So they do the same thing. RAS prep's just a little bit quicker, but if you can choose whichever one you like. Once it's deployed, like I said, you can do a full clone or a link clone. If you're not familiar with link clones, it's just a differencing disk, right? You were master image that we've created, and then when it deploys the next virtual machine, its virtual hard disk is tied to the master. So it's only using a fraction of the actual disk space that the master image is using. So if I go back in here and look at this in vCenter, you can see that this W10 fin actually was converted to a vCenter template, and then it deployed 3. So here's that W10 fin 001, 002, 003, and these are actually linked clones. So they're dependent on this one being here. If I blew this away and deleted the disk, these would fail. If you look at them, they're just full-on virtual machines, right? I can start and stop. I can power them off. I can configure and look at the virtual hard disks and all the virtual hardware that I want going through here. Here's the virtual hardware. And if I look at the hard disk, it's 32 gigs because that's what I created, but it's actually using less than that. It's potentially could get to that, but it probably never will because, like I said, it's using a differencing disk. So the virtual link clone will deploy faster and use up less physical disk space than a regular clone. All right, if I look at another environment, if I'd done this on scale, here's my scale environment, and this is what it's going to look like in others. They don't really have a templating feature like vCenter was. ESXi standalone will look at this way too, but here's one I created called W10HR. It just powered off, and it's sitting here in the power off stage. You can see right here, and then it created W10HR001, W10HR002, 003, and so forth. But the same rules apply. These are all link clones to the master. I could have done a full clone, but I'm just doing link clones. Okay. So that's what that part does. And then if I click over to the advanced, this is going to be different on the hypervisor. I can choose where and when I want to set it. I can add the license keys for deployment, a key management service, or if I have a multi-application activation key, I can plug that in here. Once that's done, I have a template that's set. And then I would simply go back over here to publishing. And I've already done it, but I'll start. I would go to add. It's a desktop. It's a virtual desktop. Next, I would give it a name. This is what the end users would see. And then I would say connect to a specific template. I click on the 3 dots, and I would pick one of the VDI templates that I have. So you could use the template over and over again if you wanted to. The other settings down here are just end user settings, right? Full screen, client settings, typically leave those as the default. This other checkbox is persistent or non-persistent. Persistent is the default. So the way this works is when an end user logs in for the first time, RAS will assign them a virtual desktop, and then that desktop will always be theirs. So they're always getting the same desktop over and over again that they can do with it what they want. If I uncheck the persistent desktop or the checkbox, then when a user logs off, that virtual machine goes back in the hopper and can be reassigned to somebody else. So you can choose either way. Most people are using, again, persistent connections, but you certainly could do non-persistent. And then if I go back up to my farm and VDI infrastructure, and then we look at this, if I click on desktops, I can see the desktops that are out there. Here's my 3 for Fin and 3 for HR, and I can see who's assigned to it, and I can see if it's persistent or it's random. So I can review that. And then if I want to unassign it, let's say Mae West has left the company and she's not coming back, I'll unassign it. That virtual machine would be reassigned to somebody else. I would break the persistence manually here. So that's effectively what these do. You can also import your own virtual machines and add them manually or on pool or something like that if you've already got them existing. But the best thing, of course, is to go ahead and create them. And then sessions, I can do session management here if I'd like. So what does it look like from the end user experience? Well, if I'll minimize this, I'll go back into the farm. And let's go back to my main one where I've got Mae West logged in. She would just see a virtual desktop, and you probably wouldn't see all 3 of these. I could just pick and choose. I've launched one called HR for her because, of course, Mae West is in a virtual desktop called HR. That's her group. You could launch it with the client, and that's going to look like, look at this, right? There we go. I'm just in an RDP window on my Mac, or if I was on Windows, it'd be a Windows thing. So it would just look like an RDP window that we all know and love. But I could also launch it clientlessly. When I do that, here's the desktop. You can see my environment's running a little slow. That's why it's painting. But now I'm running in a tab on the browser, right? Isn't that kind of cool? Now, you wouldn't want to work in a tab, but it gives you an idea of what it looks like. But you see the little toolbar on the right? That has my upload, my download, my clipboard, and some other stuff, but it also has the full screen. So now when I do that, now I'm full screen on this desktop. I'm running in a tab on the browser, but I have a nice full screen environment. And it would perform a little bit faster if I didn't have the hit on my server that I'm running too much stuff on it, right? That's why I'm getting the screen repaints. But that's it. So that's that part for VDI. The one other thing too, by the way, if I break out of this, is I can do auto scaling for remote desktop servers too. If you look at my template here, and I come down here, I've got one called RDSH for auto scale. It's the same thing. I would just go ahead and get an RDSH server that's already out there that I've created. I'm not going to create the first one for you. And if I go into the properties, these settings are very familiar, right? How many virtual machines, keep the buffer available, or how many I want a buffer, the RAS prep, sys prep, all this other stuff. But what I can do about this that's really cool, if I go back up to farm and then RD session hosts, I've created a group called my auto scaling group, and I've added that template into the group, and then I publish apps from this group. Now when I come in here to template settings, I can actually set performance thresholds for a terminal server, for remote desktop server. So as it approaches these performance thresholds that I set, then I'm going to create another server and another server and another server, or another couple of servers, or another dozen servers. It just depends on the threshold settings that you want to do. And it'll keep auto scaling. So if you've got certain times a year that are busier than others, it'll scale up, and then we can also have it scale down. Okay, these servers aren't being used. We're going to, once they drop below a certain performance threshold across the entire group, we're going to start draining and unassigning users so that eventually everybody will be logged off that server. Once it's empty, we're going to delete it. So it can scale up and it can scale down. So you can do that with remote desktop servers, and you also can do that with VDI desktops as well. And if I go back over here to farm and VDI, and then I'll look at, okay, let's look at one other setting on these templates. I will right click and I'll go to properties, and then I'll go to settings. And then again, I can choose it for all of them or just this virtual machine. But remember when I told you if a user logs off and it's not persistent, it can go back in the hopper? Well, I can decide what happens when the user logs off, right? If the user logs off virtual machine, and I can force them to log off, I can unassign that virtual machine so it goes back into the hopper. I can reboot it so at least somebody's getting a reasonably clean virtual machine coming in. I can suspend it, or I can recreate it. So when a user logs off, we actually can blow that virtual machine away, recreate a new one, and then they're back in business on an absolutely clean virtual machine without having to deal with the crumbs and bits from the last user. Now, if you're going to be doing this, you obviously want to make your virtual machine stateless, right? Meaning they all need to be the same. And I've got some user profile management going on so that the profiles are not in the virtual desktop. Their data is being saved somewhere else because I'm blowing it away and recreating it and somebody else can get it. They get a random virtual machine. I don't want their data in there. If you have that kind of an environment going on for VDI or for remote desktop server, I can come in here and right click and put it in maintenance mode. And what that'll do is that'll put all the cloned virtual machines to sleep, and it'll wake up the master. Or in vCenter, it'll take that template and it'll create it, turn it back into a virtual machine, just like you would do in vCenter, or it'll wake it up if you're in one of the other platforms. I then can perform all my updates, new software, Windows updates, whatever it is I'm doing on that during my maintenance window. And once I'm done, I log off, I take it out of maintenance window, and it'll recreate all the virtual machines. Notice I said recreate. It will blow away all the clones and it'll recreate them, but they're updated. So if you keep your information or your virtual machine stateless, that's a very powerful feature. If you have users that are customizing their own virtual machines, you wouldn't want to do this because they're going to get their VM blown away. It'll recreate them clean and they'll be unhappy with you. But if your virtual machines are stateless, go ahead and do that. The test up here on the template If you're creating 100 at once, you actually can create a test. It'll go ahead and create like 3, and it'll finish the cloning process, and it'll roll back and blow those 3 away. So then you're ready to go. So if you're creating 100 at once, you don't have to just say go once you're done with the template and hope for the best. You actually can test it, and it'll create a handful for you to see if it works. Make sure there's no issues with the cloning or permissions or anything else. Then you can go live. Okay, one other quick thing that's new in RAS I wanted to show you real quick. VDI is if I go back to providers, farm VDI, and I click on our little blue plus up here in the top right, you may have noticed we have a cloud computing. So I select that, I click next, and I can also do this not just with on-prem hypervisors, but with Microsoft Azure. The reason we call it cloud computing and not just Microsoft Azure is that we will be adding other cloud providers in the future. But right now it just supports Azure. And once you fill all this out and go through, then the Azure virtual machines would show up in the virtual guest list, just like it does here. And then if I go back to templates and so forth, I can do everything that I normally could do with it. Okay, so that's pretty much it for VDI. So let's go ahead and we'll roll right in and let's install monitoring. And for that, I'm going to switch over to back to our system where it's kind of ready to go. So I've downloaded the monitor. I think I put it under my downloads folder. Let's hope. There it is. So here's the performance monitor. So I would just double click this and run it. And literally, I just need to take the defaults. So I'm going to get that out of the way. Accept the license agreement, of course. Next, install. And you can kind of put this anywhere. I usually just put it on one of the publishing agent servers, but it doesn't really matter. It's going to go pretty quick. Once it installs, I could access the monitor directly and say launch it, but I never do that. I want to tie it into the RAS console itself. Okay, there it is. So I'm going to uncheck the box. I'm going to go ahead and click finish. It's done. I'm now going to go back into the RAS console. And you notice we have this monitoring thing here. And if I click on monitoring, it'll tell me it's not set up and it's not configured from here. It's actually configured under the administration icon. But if I click on this little shortcut, it takes me to it. And then I just go to the performance monitor. I will enable it. And this server where I installed it is RAS cert-01. Hopefully I did that right. And then I just click apply, update. And then now if I go down to monitoring, it'll take a second to populate. But then it's there. Okay, so it'll take a few minutes to populate, but now I can get information across my entire farm, right? My session information, my CPU usage, and there's nothing going on at the moment. Like I said, it takes a little while to populate. But I can collapse these settings, look at disk usage, memory. I can pick certain farm instances or whatever, or I can just let it do to all, and it gives me information, like I said, across my whole farm about what's going on, and this will populate in a second. Okay, so let's go ahead and move over to SQL. I know we only got a few minutes left. I'm actually going to play a video and then live narrate over it because it does require an installation of SQL Server, and instead of us watching the screen counters go, we can just speed up the video that way. Okay, so this is the one component that requires SQL. You can use SQL Advanced Express if you want, not just SQL Express. It doesn't have the reporting services. So I'm going to go ahead and install this. And as it runs through, I'll speed it up. Yeah, we can use the Microsoft Update. I'll let this go through. And then here's a few of the tricky settings. This is all documented very carefully, so make sure you look at the knowledge base article or whatnot to follow this. But here is the first one. I want to make sure that we do the SQL Server. I don't need these pieces. I probably want the client tools. Well, down at the bottom, the management tools, but I don't really need the rest of it. And those are the settings to do. So let's go ahead and go next. And once we get through this part, the named instance, we do recommend that you use for named instance RAS reporting view, or RAS reporting rather. You can change it to something else if you'd like. I've never tried it. I always just use the default RAS reporting, which is what's included in the documentation. We'll go on to next. Okay, that's fine. It looks good here, so we can just kind of move on. And then for the authentication mode, let's add some users here. This is what often trips people up. Certainly domain admins, I should put in here. And then I also want to add in a, this is a RAS specific user that you should have created. This is that RAS reporting view. Create that, and it's all in the documentation to do that. And then we'll go ahead and go next, and we can just install and configure. Okay, and I'll speed this up for us, so we'll just flip right on through it pretty quick. Okay, so there we go. You can see that everything installed successfully. So we'll go on to close. We can get out of the installer. I sped that up dramatically for us. You're welcome. And then we'll go down to the start, and we'll go back into the SQL tools under, I'm doing SQL Server 2014. Obviously, we do support later versions of SQL. And I'm going to go into the reporting manager, reporting services configuration, connect to our database, RAS reporting, and go to the web service URL. And we use port 8085. So I'm going to change that, and go ahead and click apply. And we can get out of this one. You can see that it was done there, right? And then we'll go back down to the start button and back into the SQL tools. And this time I want to go into the Management Studio itself. Okay, and that'll pop up, and we'll connect again to RAS reporting. And this is, again, the one that kind of trips people up. So then I'm going to go to security and logins. And then under the NT authority system here, under server roles, I want to make sure that that has sysadmin rights. Otherwise, this will work for certain users, but not for other people. You can go ahead and do that. Okay. And now the rest of it is just super simple. It's like setting up the monitoring. You just go to next, accept the defaults. Yeah, get the license agreement next. There's RAS reporting is what I call the instance. There's the username of RAS reporting view that we use for Active Directory. Go on next. Let me speed this up a little bit here. Okay, spread that up for us as well. That's it. I can go ahead and click finish. And then I go back to the RAS console. And under administration and reporting is where you would enable this. And I go to reporting. I've already got it filled in. I've added RAS reporting view. And I've added my password for that account. Test the connection. Hey, it worked. And you can just click apply. That's it. So now if I go down to reporting, it'll take a second to connect to the database. There it is. You can see we've got a bunch of reports canned. You can create your own custom reports. I launched application usage, and you can see the apps that we're using. You can switch it to a pie chart if you'd like, sort by application name. I also launched farm health by notice. So if we go there and click on that, or by machine rather, farm health by machine, I'll click on that. I would actually pick the virtual machine or the RAS component that I want. I'll grab this gateway. I'll go over and click view report, and it'll give me a report of, there we go, of how the health is, CPU, memory usage. That's that for reporting. Real quick, just very briefly, I want to show you a couple of quick things in the back in the RAS console under administration. Reporting is where you would actually configure or integrate with the reporting service and the monitoring service. We do have a mailbox tab here where you can integrate with your mail server. This does two things for you. One is you as an administrator can get notifications and alerts if something's going on, or a service account that you set up for things that happen in the environment. You also can send out emails to your end users for like onboarding people. Hey, here's how you connect to the system. Here's a link to download. Or if you're using HTML5, it'll send them the link directly to just go to this URL and go. That's easy enough. Under the settings tab, this is where you would back up all the settings within the RAS console, all this work that we've done. Yes, you can back it up, please do. You also can restore. If you want to automate the backups, you can use PowerShell. And there's a handy link here to the PowerShell guide, which gives you some examples and walks you through doing that. So you can automate backing up. Updates, you can update this whenever you're ready. Whenever you release a new version, you're always entitled to it. It'll check whenever you launch the console. You can always click check now also by default, and it will check for it. It takes, usually when we release a new version, we don't do this right away. We give it a little time in the wild before we start prompting people to update. But if you want to do the upgrade instantly because there's a feature or a fix or something that you need, you can always just download the latest MSI install file and run the installer, and it will detect RAS and just go right to the upgrade. Do that on the master publishing agent first, and then push out the upgrades to all the other agents. Also, as a service, because support is included, you can actually schedule time with our support team. They'll walk you through it, and then that way if something were to go a little sideways, hey, you're already on the phone with support. Most people do that like once, and then they realize that the process is so easy, that's enough, and that's all they have to do. Last topic is under accounts. You can have different levels of administrators. So I'm obviously operating under a root administration. I get access to anything, but I can limit people to certain screens, certain views, certain abilities so that they can be helpful, but not too helpful. And a very common one would be somebody that could manage just the user sessions. So if I go up to farm and already session hosts and sessions, just like you could do under VDI, I can get into these users here, and I could do things such as log them off, send them a message, log off stuck sessions. I could even, if they were actually logged in, request remote control, and then that would allow me to kind of see what they're doing and help for troubleshooting. And then the piece that we installed earlier that I haven't shown you yet was the, in the web console, was the web administration. Remember we did that custom installation? You just log into this. Any user with just user administration privileges can get to this if you tell them where it is and give them an account, of course. And then here they could view overall system health. They can't make any changes here. And then if they click on the user piece here, they can do some basic user administration, see who's logged in, log off stuck messages or stuck systems and things like that. Okay, so that's available. This is a nice help desk tool. It's not meant for just full-on administration. And with that, we're done. So let me jump over to PowerPoint real quick. There's some other slides in the deck, but you'll have access to all of them. Just essentially what we covered, a little bit more detail, but you will have a link to this recording and to the slide deck. You'll also get a survey. Please fill that out. And let us know. Make sure you also specify your geography. We have different people teaching this around the world. If you don't put in your geography, I'm not sure if you're talking about me, you're not going to get me into trouble. You're not going to hurt my feelings if you give us feedback that's less than perfect. We don't do that silly thing where, oh, if it's not perfect, it's a fail. We actually like honest feedback to try to improve what we're doing. So please do that. And then, of course, take the certification exam, and you can go right here. Again, I showed this slide earlier to the Parallels RAS partner portal, and then you can get trained. And then don't forget, also, we have an advanced certification training. It's a bit longer. There's a lot of information in it. It's about 4 hours, but it's the same kind of format online. And with that, we are done. So thank you so much. I'm going to hang around for a little bit longer just so that we can make sure I get all the questions cleared out in the chat window. But other than that, we're all set. So thanks everybody for attending. Have a great day. Okay, and I don't see anything else in the chat window, so I think we've got them all. I went back and answered hopefully everything. Thanks so much for attending, everybody. I think that'll do it. I'm going to go ahead and kill the WebEx. All right, have a good day. Bye-bye.